Hello and welcome guys. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. This is Affinity, Chaos. Chapter 681. Alice walked back to her seat after being announced as the winner of the battle. She looked up at the stone plaque, and her name was written in the 4th place. After her battle, the other battles on the platforms lasted for another 5 minutes before they ended. As soon as they ended, the man was about to call for the end of the event, when they saw Reynolds getting up once again, walking in the direction of the platform. What's he trying to do? Discussions broke out in the arena. This was the round for those in the mid-stages of the Overlord plane. Reynolds had already defeated the person ranked first in the early stages rankings, so they felt he was done with the competition. Who would have thought he would step up once again? And it was even for the mid-stages rankings. On getting to the platform, Reynolds didn't hide his intentions as he challenged the person ranked first. The man in charge of the platform was a little taken aback. He felt obligated to remind Reynolds that this was the mid-stages, and not the early stages. He felt maybe Reynolds had forgotten he fought against the person ranked first and won already. I know, I'd like to see if I can at least put up a fight against the first person, Reynolds replied with a humble smile. When the crowd overheard him, they felt his pride had gotten to his head. Even the old men who held the group in high esteem felt annoyed by this. The man looked back, and after getting a nod from the old men in charge of the event, he finally called the person ranked first in the mid-stages rankings forward. This person was a young man with a calm demeanor. When he stepped onto the stage, he didn't show the usual proud air geniuses ranked first usually have. Instead, he looked at his opponent with a confident, yet friendly smile. Hello, Reynolds waved at him. Hello, I'm Kyle. The young man introduced himself with a smile. It's nice meeting you, Kyle. I'm Reynolds. Reynolds approached Kyle and stretched out his hand. After shaking hands, both fighters distanced themselves. The man in charge of the platform looked at the duo. After getting confirmation from them, he gave the go-ahead for the battle to start. As soon as the battle started, the young man standing opposite Reynolds was covered with blazing green flames. Seeing this, Gray and his friends couldn't help but exchange glances. They rarely saw people with special types of their elements, so seeing this young man, they were somewhat surprised. Reynolds laughed out in delight before a figure made of lightning formed above him. The figure held onto a sword and shield with a bow on its back. It was none other than his elemental warrior. The crowd, who was still marveling at the sight of green flames, were once again astounded by the surprise of seeing an elemental warrior. Even in the Aurora continent, high-level summoners were rare. Reynolds, who most of the people felt was the weakest amongst the group, and thought he was too proud when he stepped forward to challenge someone 3 stages ahead of him, seemed to be as special as his friends. As it stands, Gray and Klaus seemed to be the only ones stronger than him in their group. What was also worth mentioning was that if not for Klaus's special water attack, they would rate him lower than Reynolds. Just where did these freaks come from? This was the only question running through the minds of everyone. Gray and Klaus were already special in their own rights. Alice was stronger than your regular genius, and other than her aggressive fighting style, there was nothing special about her. The rest, however, were freaks. Being in such a group of friends, one would feel intimidated. If they were to find out that Gray and Void, the seemingly useless cat, had awakened their domains, it was unknown what their reactions would be like. Even the old powerhouses here could only tell that Void was special. Other than that, they didn't know anything about him. The only reason they even spared him a look was because he was on Gray's shoulder most of the time. Kyle, who was covered in green fire, was just as surprised as the crowd, but after his initial shock, he laughed out loud. Haha, you didn't disappoint. He charged at the elemental warrior and attacked wildly. The previous calm demeanor was gone. Now, he looked and acted like a warlord. Reynolds fought alongside the elemental warrior, making the pressure on Kyle high. Boom, bang, bam. The battle didn't start off slow like the other battles. It went straight to the peak. Kyle was known around for being a battle maniac, and seeing how he was doing against Reynolds and the elemental warrior showed his strength. Most 7th stage Overlord plane elementalists would not be able to cope under the combined assault of Reynolds and the elemental warrior. Even though Reynolds was weaker, it didn't mean that he could neglect his attacks. Kyle's plan from the get-go was simple: take out Reynolds and he wins. This is what everyone thought of as well. Unfortunately, with the elemental warrior there, and Reynolds being a cunning individual, It was impossible to take him out. He hid under the attack range of the elemental warrior. If Kyle tried to attack, he would be sneak attacked by the elemental warrior. At this pace, he risked losing the fight, or even ending it as a tie. There's also the chance that he might not even get Reynolds and might just lose altogether. Klaus and Void were laughing at Reynolds' cunning nature. He was using the elemental warrior to full effect. Kyle was unable to get close to him, and the elemental warrior even had the advantage in their battles. Whenever he focused fully on the elemental warrior, Reynolds would attack from behind. It got to the extent that even the calm Kyle was starting to get frustrated by what was happening. Reynolds was out of his reach, while he was very much within Reynolds' grasp. This meant that he couldn't attack Reynolds, but Reynolds could attack him whenever he wanted. A cruel situation to be in. Even a good person will go nuts whenever they are in such a position. The crowd watched the battle a little taken aback. Reynolds was being shameless to the core, but they couldn't complain, since the elemental warrior was his, and this was a viable battle strategy. Many people here would do the same if they were in his place. Haha, yes, be shameless. Klaus laughed loudly, attracting the gaze of those around. Gray shook his head while Alice glared at him. Their great reputation had been thrown in the mud by these two crazy guys. One was acting shamelessly on the platform, while the other had a proud look. It was like he was a proud teacher. Reynolds continued irritating his opponent, making him make mistakes, which gives the elemental warrior a chance to overwhelm him. The man in charge had a weird smile on his face. It was evident that Reynolds had won this as well. Chapter 682. Swoosh. Bang. The elemental warrior sent Kyle flying. I admit defeat. Kyle didn't fight any longer before giving up. Fighting against Reynolds and his elemental warrior was a pain to fight against. Reynolds made things worse, almost making it impossible for him to concentrate. Haha, thank you for letting me win. Reynolds laughed as he approached Kyle. Kyle didn't feel too downcast after his loss, shaking hands with Reynolds. He even went back with him to where Gray and the others were seated. His easygoing nature made it easy for him and the group to become friends. Making friends with a group like theirs was a bonus to anybody, so he naturally took advantage of it. He was surprisingly not from Dixon region. Just like the group, he was traveling, trying to gain experience. While the group was speaking, the man on the platform called for the end of the competition. The young lady who was ranked first in the late stages Overlord Plane rankings and the middle-aged man approached them. Introducing herself, her name was Avril Cassidy. The group introduced themselves to her and Kyle. When Gray introduced himself, a look of realization dawned on the middle-aged man accompanying Avril. So, he's from that Dawson family. To think they've produced another genius of this caliber. He thought to himself. If Gray knew of his thoughts, he would have refuted them, since he didn't know any Dawson family from the Aurora continent. Honestly, other than his parents, he knew no other person from the Dawson family. He didn't even know if he had any uncles or aunties. They spoke for a while before Gray and his group decided to leave. Gray in particular was in a hurry, since he wanted to try to create the light space as soon as possible. The group left alongside Kyle and Avril. Before they left, a few youngsters approached them, trying to create some ties with them. The group welcomed them. Making more friends was better than making enemies. These friends might be useful later in the future. There was nothing left for the group to do in Dixon region, so they left the city immediately. Gray went straight to the woods. Finding a cave, he immediately sat down cross-legged, before trying to comprehend what he got from the light element today. The others didn't know what was up with him, but they knew it must be important, so they let him be. They stayed outside the cave, talking about the competition and how the battles were. Each reflected on their battles and where they could improve. In the blink of an eye, 2 days went by in a flash. Gray was still cooked up in the cave, not showing any signs of coming out. The group were bored, even as far as going to the city to get some things, leaving Void to protect Gray. He was the strongest, and anyone he couldn't fight against, they couldn't either. They met a few people who approached them to join their factions, however, rejected it. Gray told them not to let others know they were not in any faction, since it might put them in danger. Geniuses were coveted everywhere, so it was best to be cautious. People might be scared of their background and not attack them. This is their best protection right now, so they had to use it properly. 5 more days went by before Gray finally made some movements. Opening his eyes, it was covered entirely with a bright white light. Haha, Things were better than expected. He laughed lightly to himself. He not only used this opportunity to create the light space, but he also entered the chaos space and started comprehending the light element immediately. Due to his past efforts, things were a little easier for him. He couldn't help but breathe out a sigh of relief. It was like he had finally achieved the first step in becoming the strongest. He presently had every element he knew. 8 elements. That was something that would send the world into chaos if they found out. It's a shame I still wasn't able to break through to the 7th stage of the Overlord plane. He shook his head. He originally thought comprehending a new element would have made him advance to the next stage. But unfortunately, it seems that things were starting to become difficult for him. Now he understood why it was difficult to advance as elementalists grew stronger. His own was even worse due to his multiple elements. This made his requirements even higher. He had been advancing quite quickly before, but now it seems as if things will be a little slow for now. He threw everything to the back of his mind and stood up. When Gray stepped out, he saw the tired looks from his friends. "What's with the faces?" he asked with a smile. "You better have a good reason for keeping us waiting," Klaus said. "Of course." Gray smiled before opening his hand as a white ball of light appeared. "You've comprehended the light element," Reynolds exclaimed. "Yes. Why did you think I came here straight away? I gained some insights at the competition when I saw people using it. This helped me a lot." Gray grinned as he explained. "Haha, nice. Now you can heal us." Klaus laughed. No, my mastery is still too low, and like usual, the elemental grade is extremely low, pink to be precise. It will take a while before I can increase it." Gray shook his head, killing Klaus's wishful thinking. "A shame. That means for now it's useless." Reynolds asked with a sad smile. "Not exactly. It can heal minor injuries, and it will boost my speed. I'm happy with my gains." Gray replied. "Congratulations." Alice congratulated him, unlike the two boys. "Thank you." Gray smiled in response. "Can we get going now?" Void finally spoke up. Staying in one place was not in accordance with his style. He had to be on the move constantly so that he could see new things. Gray looked at the others, and seeing their expressions, he knew they were tired of this place as well. He had no objections with leaving, since there was nothing he had to do here. With that, the group finally continued their journey. Other than when Gray and Klaus were trying to understand that heavy water, this was the longest they have stayed in a place. While they were walking, they spoke about their experiences so far when Gray was still in closed-doors training. About 8 factions approached them, but they refused all of them. They were even invited to meet an old lady who was quite powerful. She spoke with them in a kind manner. In the end, she also wanted them to join her faction, which they also refused. Some days later, they were getting close to leaving Dixon region. On the way, Gray trained with his light element. He was also very close to breaking through. Even though he didn't break through immediately, it helped him get very close to his target. So he didn't feel too down about it. They opted to travel by foot instead of using the teleportation arrays. This made their journey longer, but they gained considerable experience from it, encountering new things on the way, while also facing some life-threatening moments. The strength of the group continued improving as they traveled. Klaus was getting better at his new water. Gray had too many focuses, so his progress with it was a little slower than Klaus's. Alice was fighting more, honing her skills with every battle. Reynolds was also pushing to advance to the 4th stage of the Overlord plane. He was very close to it. Doing this would undoubtedly push the stage of his elemental warrior to the 7th stage, making it stronger. Void was the only one who was carefree. He didn't think too much. He didn't train the way the others did. Some days went by and they finally left the Dixon region, entering the next region. Just like the Dixon region, this was also a mid-level region, so the geniuses here were around the same level as those in Dixon region. They fell into contemplation. Fighting against the geniuses here would be beneficial, but would also take time if they were on the same level as those in Dixon region. Should we skip this place, or? Gray looked at the others. I want to see how far I've improved, Alice said. She enjoyed fighting, so it was natural that she would agree to them staying and challenging the geniuses here. Klaus and Reynolds had no issues with them staying for a few days, and neither did Gray. They started searching for those in the geniuses rankings. They weren't as lucky as the last time when they encountered the geniuses rankings competition. so they had to search for each individual personally. It took them a while, but they managed to locate the person ranked 4th in this region's mid-stages Overlord Plane rankings. Chapter 683. Buzz. Bang. Boom. The sound of lightning crashing into something strong resonated out. Wow, she's definitely gotten more powerful, Reynolds commented from the side. Beside him were Gray and Klaus. They were watching Alice's battle with the person ranked 4th in this region's mid-stages Overlord Plane Geniuses rankings. The person was a young man who was a wind elementalist. They've been fighting for almost 10 minutes now, and even though Alice was 2 stages lower than him, she was able to go toe-to-toe with him. Swoosh. Boom. Bang. A large tornado sprang up from the ground, lifting Alice into the sky. While in the sky, red and silver lights flashed in the tornado. Before long, the tornado was forcefully destroyed. Alice was seen standing mid-air, covered in lightning and flames. She used the attack Lightning Rain while mid-air, before throwing multiple fireballs at her opponent. She almost tried to replicate Gray's Meteor Descent. However, she was unable to get it accurately. The young man created a storm to fight against the attacks coming his way. The battle continued as they exchanged blows in a tight and heated battle. In terms of power, this person was stronger than the one she fought against in the Dixon region, so it was difficult for her to overwhelm him. If she was still on the same power level as when she fought in Dixon region, then she would have lost long ago. But thanks to her slight improvement, she managed to last long. As the battle raged on, the young man slowly started to gain the upper hand. He had a higher cultivation stage than Alice, so it was understandable that he was stronger. They fought for 5 more minutes. Bang! Alice's figure was sent flying, crashing into a rock by the side. At the moment Alice crashed into the rock, another loud explosion was heard from the other side. Just like Alice, the young man was sent flying. His condition was slightly better than Alice's, which showed he had the edge in their brawl. Alice stood up before cleaning the dust off her body. You win. She didn't feel sad with this loss. From the start, she knew this person was much stronger than the person ranked 4th in Dixon region. Not just that, but he was also a very experienced fighter. Unlike most youngsters, he didn't make moves carelessly. Alice and the others usually used their experiences to their advantage in battles. Compared to them, most of the geniuses here haven't gone through deadly training. Their battle knowledge was low. They might be powerful, but they didn't know when and how to attack properly. It was a close battle. If you were a stage higher, then I would have lost. The young man replied sincerely. He wasn't trying to make her feel better or anything. It was the truth. Alice was only in the 4th stage of the Overlord Plane, while he was in the 6th stage, 2 stages higher. Yet he fought her for this long. With a small upgrade in her stage, she would be able to beat him. Thank you for agreeing to spar with me. I'll be leaving now. Alice showed her gratitude before turning to her friends. The young man stared at the group, looking at them strangely. He guessed they were from one of those high-leveled regions, but he couldn't ascertain it. A thought came to his head, but just as he was about to, he stopped himself. If she's already this powerful, how powerful would he be? He looked at Gray. Gray didn't hide his cultivation stage, so he was able to find out that he was in the same stage as himself. Alice was already this powerful, and she was 2 stages below him. Challenging Gray might come as a humiliation for him, so he stopped himself. Gray and the others left while discussing the battle. They all saw how much Alice had improved. She was the only one who wanted to test out her strength, so they didn't stay any longer. Gray even suggested they use the teleportation array, so they could get to the other regions quicker. According to the map they had, he still had to travel through at least 5 regions before they would leave these mid-level regions. Their plan was to get to a higher level region and join a powerful faction. They all didn't want to join the same faction, only the ones beneficial to them. Of course, all factions could help with every element, but most factions focused on improving a single element. This would make training faster and more efficient. 2 months went by in the blink of an eye. The group had been in the Aurora continent for a while now, and they were starting to get used to things here. In these 2 months, Gray and Reynolds had made breakthroughs, getting to the 7th and the 4th stage respectively. Reynolds's elemental warrior was currently in the 7th stage as well, which meant he couldn't compete in the mid-stages, geniuses rankings any longer. They've gone through 5 regions in this time and battled through all of them. Although they used the teleportation arrays on some occasions, they mostly traveled by foot. They encountered more things this way, increasing their knowledge and experience. On one occasion, Klaus found a strange treasure. While he was trying to claim it, they found out that it belonged to a tribe of barbarians who were staying in the forest. The barbarians chased them for days, and after a brutal battle, they finally let them go. They were lucky the tribe leader was not around. According to what the barbarians said, the tribe leader was in the Sage Plain. He would have beaten the hell out of the group if he caught them. This was Gray's first time battling with barbarians, and he took advantage of it. They were the only people who trained their bodies, so he tried to see which was stronger. Unfortunately for him, he lost in that regard. Chapter 684. Their encounter with the barbarians taught them a lesson. Of course, it didn't stop Void and Klaus from causing trouble. Void could sense treasures, so whenever they were close to anyone, he would naturally sense them. Going through the forest meant they would encounter treasures, and with treasures came danger. The battles helped the group grow, but they also showed them that the dangers here were not on the same level as the Azure continent. Had Gray not comprehended the light element, they would have completely used up the remaining vials of healing tonic. The items they've managed to acquire were only raw items, not usable to them. They could only sell them whenever they got to a city or town. Gray's light element, however, could only do so much. He doesn't have a high mastery of it, neither is the elemental grade high. They had to get healing tonics from the cities, since the one they got from the Blooming Viper was too valuable. Klaus and Alice were still in the same stage as before, but their strength had seen a significant increase. Klaus in particular had been focusing on his ice ability and his heavy water, making them more powerful. The heaviness of the water has almost doubled. Now, without even a sneak attack, he could use it to break through Gray's earth wall. Alice had been practicing as well. Unlike the others, she didn't really have anything special other than being a dual elementalist. So she trained more than they did. They had challenged the geniuses from the regions they've gone through, and she had lost one, drawn one, and won the other 3. Klaus also fought as well. He only managed to defeat the person ranked 15th. When he tried to challenge someone higher, he lost quite woefully at that. Gray had been conservative, not challenging those in the late stages. He only watched the others. Reynolds had started challenging those in the mid stages, and without the help of the elemental warrior, he was unable to get into the top 15. In the same stage, Alice was stronger than him. They were currently in Latrum region, the last region before moving to the high-level regions in the Western continent. They've been traveling for a while now, and the group felt it would be best if they joined one of these factions sooner. Gray and the others had heard of people going into secret realms, and without joining a faction or being from a powerful family, then there was no way for him to join them. Gray had a score to settle, so unlike the others, he was short on time. The quicker he improved, the better for him. His opponent wasn't an ordinary person. The humiliation and life-threatening attack he experienced that day, he wanted to return back to the young man. He hasn't told his friends of this, so they had no idea of it. Alive suggested they search for those in the geniuses rankings like usual and challenge them. Since Klaus and Reynolds agreed, Gray didn't really have much of a choice. It took them almost a week to find who they were searching for. They had to travel through multiple cities. From their numerous travels, Gray's essence stones were already halved, and at this rate, it would finish in no time. The plan of making a long-range teleportation array came to his mind, but when he tried it, he realized he couldn't pinpoint the location of the one he made back at the strange forest. The space here was too strong for him, so he gave up on that idea. Although he gave up on the idea, it didn't stop him from making the arrays though. He would get powerful enough to use it one day. The target of their search was a young lady who went on an expedition, and according to what the group found out, a treasure was forming there. It would form completely, and most of the geniuses in the Overlord plane had gone there. The treasure was only beneficial to those in the Overlord plane, so people in the Sage plane didn't come over. When the group got to the location, they were stunned by the barren land in front of them. Not a single vegetation was in sight, only dried rocks which looked like they would crumble from a single touch. "What the hell is this?" Klaus commented when he saw the state of the place. "This was caused by the darkness element," Void remarked after getting a feel of the place. "The darkness element?" Alice and the others asked, stunned. Gray closed his eyes and tried to feel the darkness element in the area. It took a while, but he was able to sense it later on. He's right. It must have been done a long time ago, but it's still affecting this place. He looked at the place, a little shaken by how powerful the person who did this was. Even after so long, it still had such an effect. It showed the elementalist was by no means weak. Actually, this was caused well over 300 years ago. I'm surprised you sensed it. A voice came from the side. The voice sounded a bit familiar. When the group turned around, they were surprised to see Kyle, the young man Reynolds fought against back at Dixon region. Kyle, you came as well. Reynolds was the first to speak up. I heard of a treasure while passing by a small tribe, so I decided to come check it out. Who would have thought I would see you four here? Now my chances of getting it are as good as gone. Kyle replied with a shake of his head. You know what happened to this place? Gray asked. Rumors had it that around 300 years ago, a powerful darkness elementalist fought against the current ruler of the Western continent. Their battle lasted over 3 days, and this place was reduced to this state. Kyle gave them a rough description of what he knew. Oh, and this is just the outer perimeters. The closer you go, the more powerful the effect. There's a miasma in the center, he added. Chapter 685. A miasma. Gray's expression changed slightly. He recalled the last time he heard about this was with Ellis's father. Apparently, he was corroded by one, almost losing his life in the process. If he hadn't gone by, then it might have been a different story. Yeah, very dangerous. Kyle nodded before adding, however, there are times where the miasma retracts, or should I say, lessen. This gives people the chance to go deeper into this place. This is one of those times, and the birth of this treasure couldn't come at a better time. Hearing Kyle's words, the others nodded in understanding. This place was probably a deadly place, but since people had explored it for many years, they had found out some secrets about it. Such places are usually filled with treasures since before people tend to go in it as long, giving it enough time to groom these treasures. This wasn't the first time Klaus and the other two were hearing of miasma, so they knew the dangers of it. There are places that are filled with excessive fire or even wind element causing them to have a miasma, but as usual, the darkness element tends to be more dangerous, thanks to its corroding ability. Are we just going to stand here? Come on, let's go in. Kyle was the first to take a step into the place. Compared to before, the group could tell that he had improved. First of all, his aura was slightly different, and he had broken through to the 7th stage of the Overlord plane. But they could tell it hadn't been long since he did it. With Kyle taking the lead, Gray and his friends followed behind him. Void looked at Kyle curiously. He naturally sensed him when he was approaching the group, but since he found his aura familiar, he didn't really feel too bothered. As they went deeper into the place, the darkness element's aura started to grow stronger. It was even to a stage that those in the origin plane would feel extremely uncomfortable when placed in this place. Every individual in the group was in the Overlord plane, so it was nothing for them to worry about for now. They soon started to sense the presence of others in this place, which was expected. After all, they heard of this place from the mouth of the public, so the birth of this treasure was pretty much made known to all. What do you think it would be? Klaus asked curiously as they walked further in. A natural treasure, I guess, Reynolds replied. Klaus almost wanted to fassip him when he heard his reply. I know it's a natural treasure. I'm asking what type of treasure it would be. A rock, fruit, weapon, stuff like that. Moron. Gray and Alice initially thought Klaus wasn't going to curse at Reynolds when they heard the starting part of his statement. Given his usual self, he would have started his statement with a curse. He, however, didn't disappoint them in the end. You're the one who asked a stupid question, creep, Reynolds naturally retorted. And before long, the duo started a cursing session. Gray and Alice were already used to it. This has been the highlight of their journey so far, so they were completely cool with it. Kyle, on the other hand, was experiencing this for the first and felt quite strange. From how seriously the duo were cursing at each other, he almost wanted to step in and play peacemaker. But seeing that Gray and Alice didn't even try to step in, he sensibly stopped himself. Hey, is it alright for them to be like this? Kyle approached Gray and asked with a whisper. Yeah, it's totally fine. I'll be more worried about them if they haven't quarreled in a day. Gray replied nonchalantly. His expression showed this was a normal occurrence. Oh, and a word of advice, don't look at them too much, you'll only draw their attention. Gray wasn't even finished before he noticed both Klaus and Reynolds were staring at them, and it's too late. Kyle was about to ask why Gray said that, but he found out a few seconds later, when the duo, who seemed as if they could kill each other a few seconds ago, started cursing at Gray. He was almost exempted, well, almost. Gray was forced to join the two-man cursing squad, which came as a huge shock to Kyle, who had always taken him for a serious-minded person who wouldn't indulge in such things. Gray didn't speak much with people, so they rarely got to see this side of him. Kyle was unfortunately the target of the trio, and after a few minutes, he was lost for words. Klaus and Reynolds were frightening opponents when it came to this. It was like they were experienced, well-seasoned fighters. But just at cursing, Gray was that bad as well. He, on the other hand, was woeful when compared to the trio. Don't let it get to you. They've had years of training. Alice comforted him when she saw his downcast expression. Kyle nodded his head but still felt frightened by the trio. They weren't the least bit reserved with their words. If not for the fact that he knew they didn't mean it in that way, he would have fought them with his life on the line, even though he knew he would lose. The group continued in this manner, and before long, they got to where the rest of the people were waiting. As soon as they got close, Void started acting strange. I want it, he said to the group. Kyle looked around trying to find the source of the voice. It was childlike, so he knew it wasn't from any of them. You want whatever's forming? Gray asked curiously while staring at the people around. Presently, there were at least 200 people here, all in the Overlord plane. They were in different stages of the Overlord plane. However, none was in the early stages. What was shocking was that none of them seemed to be over 25 years of age. This showed that most of the people here were geniuses. If such a group went to the Azure continent, then they might be able to sweep through the entire continent in a matter of days, as long as those in the Sage plane didn't show their faces. One other thing was worth mentioning, there are youngsters in the Sage plane as well. Ellis was an example. He was barely 25 years old, but he had already gotten to the mid-stages of the Overlord plane. In the same stage, he would be more powerful than those old fogies from the Azure continent. In the entire continent, other than Gray's teacher, there was only one person known to be in the mid-stages, and he was only in the 4th stage of the Sage plane after hundreds of years. The appearance of the group naturally attracted the attention of some of the people around, but after sensing the person with the highest cultivation stage was only in the 7th stage, they retracted their gazes. They naturally couldn't be too worried about such a group. Chapter 686. Yes, this thing will be very good for me. Void nodded his head vigorously, and you as well. Kyle finally managed to confirm that Void was the one speaking, and was a little lost for words. He originally thought this was a normal cat, and had almost asked why Gray kept such a cat on his shoulder. Now he understood that it was his wishful thinking. How could such a group of freaks be accompanied by something ordinary? Then we'll get it, Gray said with confidence. He didn't care who was here, so long as there was no one in the Sage plane. Then he was certain that with him using the fusion state and Void's help, they could overwhelm anyone here. They still had a trump card hidden under their sleeves, their domains. From the time they had spent here, they found out that it was quite abnormal for someone to awaken their domains this early. The earliest was usually in the Sage plane, but these two freaks awakened theirs in the Overlord plane. Klaus, Reynolds, and Alice looked at the duo as if they weren't normal when they realized this. Originally, they also had the thought of awakening theirs this early as well, but it seems as if that might not be possible anytime soon. Maybe after breaking through to the Sage plane will they be able to do so. Kyle was once again shocked by Gray. The confidence with which he said he would obtain the treasure was not something someone on his stage should have. After all, there were people at the peak of the Overlord plane here. Gray might be powerful, and since he had advanced by a stage, he would be even stronger than the last time he saw him. But he didn't think he would be able to overpower all the peak Overlord plane geniuses here alone. Even though he knew Void was special, he didn't really know how powerful he was, so he couldn't add him to the equation for now. I'll see how things go first. Maybe traveling with them might be fun and dangerous, Kyle thought as he looked at the group. The miasma was slowly receding deeper, But everyone here knew not to rush in now. They had to give the atmosphere time to get rid of most of the corrosiveness in the air. Gray and his group decided to stay put while watching the other groups. Some of the people here were acquainted with each other, so they were speaking as they waited. Fights broke out here and there, but it was nothing serious. They still haven't found the person they came here searching for. This has become their priority while they wait. They also spoke with Kyle, and found out that he was from one of the high-leveled regions, which was expected given his strength. If not for Reynolds' elemental warrior, it would have been impossible for even Alice, who was 2 stages lower than him, to fight him. Even at that time, if Reynolds hadn't been shameless with his tactic, Kyle might have gotten a chance against the elemental warrior. He was from one of the big families and came out only to grow stronger. Unlike the young lady who was accompanied by someone, he didn't like such things, opting to move alone. This would make him grow stronger faster. With someone to always protect him, he wouldn't feel any sense of pressure. The others also agreed with this reasoning. Pressure was the only thing that could make them grow stronger at a faster rate. If one was always under protection, one wouldn't feel the need to grow stronger. They might advance in cultivation stage, but they wouldn't really grow strong. In time to come, they would become one of those people who only had high cultivation stages, but insufficient strength. Time went on in the blink of an eye, and a day went by quickly. The miasma had disappeared from their view, and the shape of a building was starting to appear. Void confirmed to them that the treasure was inside this building, and it was not the only treasure inside. He was also able to get a vague feeling of danger inside the place. This sense of danger threatened him, and he warned the others about it. When the group saw how serious his expression was, they knew it was not a matter to joke about, and they might encounter life-threatening dangers inside. Their expressions became solemn. 2 more days went by before the building came into view for everyone to see. It was a large mansion. Well, it was in a large compound, to be precise. Only around half of the compound was accessible to them now, but they all knew that this building in front of them held treasures, and this was what they came here for. Without even delaying, most of the groups rushed into the compound. They knew treasures came with danger, but no one wanted to be the last to step into a potential treasure hoard like this building. Gray and his friends were among the few people who weren't making any moves. Void's warning was still sounding in their heads. Rushing in would only mean putting themselves in the face of danger. They waited to see if there were any traps outside the building. Seeing that a considerable number of people had gone in, Gray told the group to advance. In a place like this, it wasn't wise to go in first, and neither was it wise to go in last. It was best to be among the group, in the middle to be precise. They followed the crowd, giving those in front and behind them a considerable distance to ensure safety. In a place like this, except for the people you came with, no one else should and could be trusted. This was a dog-eat-dog world, where the strongest reigned supreme. They soon passed through the gates of the compound, and just like most of this place, it looked like it would be broken with nothing but a touch. But they knew it was very sturdy, and touching it might be dangerous for them. It has accumulated so much miasma that it has become deadly. Chapter 687. The group cautiously stepped into the compound, staring at the large building. It had 3 parts. The main building, which was located in the middle section, then the east and west wings. Most of the people here picked the main building, since naturally it was expected to have more treasures. Void. Gray turned to Void, waiting for his decision on which part they would pick. Void could almost accurately pinpoint where a treasure was located, so they mostly relied on him in instances like this. Wait, let me check. Void closed his eyes and spread out his spiritual senses. A few seconds later, he looked around in confusion. It's vague, I can't pick it up. We'll have to rely on luck, he said. Well, my luck is pretty much shit when it comes to things like this. Gray shook his head before turning his attention to Klaus. Of every single person he had met in his life, he had never seen anyone as lucky as Klaus. His massive growth wasn't a fluke, it was mainly attributed to his insane luck. Klaus could walk into an ordinary town, and his chances of finding a treasure were very high. If there were tiers for luck, then Klaus definitely had at least god-tier luck. This was how highly Gray regarded his luck. Gray wasn't the only one, even Alice and Reynolds knew Klaus was the luckiest among them. Making a decision in such a place, he was the obvious person to ask. Why are you all staring at me? Klaus asked when he saw his friend's gaze. Come on, use your gut feeling. Gray said straightforwardly. It doesn't work that way. I can't just pick a time to use it as if it's something I can use whenever I want. Klaus froze before turning to the left wing. Oh, I have a nice feeling about that part. When the group heard this, they turned to the east wing, and it was the one that had fewer people. The reason for this was understandable. They could still sense a bit of miasma in it. For some strange reason, it accumulated more miasma than the other parts. This meant it wasn't ordinary. Other people have noticed this as well, but many of them refrained from going there, since it would be dangerous. Alright, then let's get going. Gray and the others started walking the moment Klaus picked a part. Kyle was stunned. He literally froze in the same spot, almost unsure of what he just witnessed. Gray first asked Void to find the treasure, and Void said he was unable to locate it. Then he turned to Klaus, asking him to use his gut feeling. Klaus first tried to refute them. Then in the process, he said he felt something strange from the east wing. Kyle almost wanted to yell, of course there's something strange about it. There's still miasma there. You think miasma would remain there if it wasn't strange? He, however, refrained from doing so. This was a group of strange people, and all he could do was to deal with it. With no option, he followed them. When they got close to the door leading to the east wing, they sensed the dangerous miasma around it. Without being told anything, they each used their respective elements to form a translucent coat around them to block out the miasma. The miasma here was something they could still deal with, but if they didn't protect themselves, it would accumulate and cause them harm later in the future. Opening the door to the place, they heard the sounds of fighting. They were taken aback since they never thought people would fight so quickly. The only thing that could make them fight was a treasure. Only after they entered did they see what was happening. People were fighting. Yes, but not themselves. This place was bigger than what it seemed. From the outside, it looked only to be around 100 meters or so, but after going in, they realized it was around 400 meters, or even higher. What are those? Alice asked, alarmed. What these people were fighting were like phantoms, made entirely from darkness. They had never seen anything like this before. It's made from the darkness element. If I'm not mistaken, they are beasts corrupted by the miasma here. Now, they look like spirits. Kyle was the one who explained. He had more knowledge of this world, so it was only natural that he had an idea of what these things were. The group didn't stay idle. Well, they wanted to, but were attacked. These things could move like smoke forming in front of them. Each of them was around the 5th to the 9th stage of the Overlord plane. They were 5, adding Void. They were 6 in number, while the phantoms that appeared before them were 8. Gray and Void took on 2 each, leaving the rest for the others. Reynolds didn't immediately summon his elemental warrior. After all, their potential rivals were here. It would be bad if they knew all their trump cards. Gray and Void used 2 elements each, the fire and lightning elements respectively. Kyle's green flames and Gray's blue flames were the stars of the show. They attracted too much attention from those here. Gray stood out even more when he used his red lightning. The lightning element seemed to be effective against these miasmatic monsters. Alice used the fire and lightning element as well, while Klaus decided to outright freeze his opponent. As soon as they took out one, another would form before them. At first, they were fighting in the same place, but they finally realized that as long as they remained there, their opponents would not end. They started to advance as they fought. They weren't the only ones who had realized this. The other geniuses here had also figured it out as well. Some had done so even sooner. Boom, buzz, bang. Attacks rang out in the hall as they continued moving forward. Chapter 688. Gray's group advanced quickly. The synergy between the group was breathtaking, making them defeat the monsters before them quicker than most. According to what they've noticed, it takes around 10 seconds or so before another monster would form. Gray had tried sensing if this was the work of an array, and to his surprise, he got nothing. This meant that either it was natural, or whoever made it was on a level he didn't dare to imagine. They soon got to a flight of stairs, ascending it as they got there. When they got to the top, there were 3 paths, and on each path, there were multiple rooms. It was up to them to choose a path. Klaus. The group turned to Klaus, and he had a lost look on his face. I've told you guys that it doesn't work that way, he complained when he saw their gazes. It was almost pressurizing on him. "Well, it has worked so far," Gray encouraged. "I was only lucky." Klaus shook his head wryly. "That luck is what we want, to be precise." Alice joined in. Reynolds also joined in after a few seconds, and Klaus could only close his eyes and make an ice sword. The sword floated in front of him with the tip pointing straight. He made it move quickly, and the tip was facing from one path to another. While he was doing this, another set of monsters appeared, and the group was forced to fight against them. Gray brought out his inscriptions, using only the lightning and fire element like before. They soon took out their opponents once again. By the time they were done, the sword had already stopped moving, and it was facing the path on the right. "Well, this was the only thing I could think of. If I'm really that lucky, then we shouldn't have any problems with finding treasures here." "Well, good treasures," Klaus said with a shrug of his shoulder. Gray and the others didn't even discuss it with him. They immediately took the path the sword pointed to, and Kyle seemed to be on the verge of breaking down. Anyone could do this, he yelled in his heart, but he could only follow them. He had already asked to travel with them here, so he had no choice. As they moved, they soon got to the first door in the hallway, but they were forced to fight against the monsters before going in. After defeating the monsters, they opened the door and entered. Entering the door, they were covered by a bright light, and when they opened their eyes, they were transported to another place. "Strange, the darkness element here is very thin. In fact, it's almost non-existent," Void commented when they appeared on the place. Looking around, they seemed to have been transported to an underground cave. They could hear rushing water from the side of the wall. "Could we be underwater?" Klaus couldn't help but ask. "We are underwater, but it's best if we don't spread out our spiritual senses," Gray advised. "Why?" Reynolds asked. "Roar." A loud roar came from behind them, followed by heavy footsteps. "That's why," Gray replied before running in the other direction. The aura he could sense from whatever the creature was at the very peak of rank 5. Its aura was stronger than that of Void's, which meant that it was very close to breaking through to rank 6. There might even be a chance that its current battle power was around early rank 6. This wasn't something they could take on yet. It was best they left it behind and ran away. Luckily for the group, the phantoms they had been fighting against didn't appear here, so they could travel quickly. The sound of the beast chasing after them was slowly getting louder, and they knew at this rate, it would catch up to them. They ran for almost a minute before encountering an intersection. "I can sense it, it's on the left one," Void said excitedly before rushing towards the left path. Kyle was once again dumbstruck. First of all, Void was unable to sense anything, but after following Klaus's lucky guess, they managed to not only pick the right path, but the first room they opened led them straight to where they wanted. They can't be regarded as normal any longer, he concluded in his mind before rushing after the group. Whenever they made a decision like this, he was always the last one to move, because he found their method strange and unbelievable. In fact, it was also insane. The group rushed into the left path, and as they continued deeper, the atmosphere started to emit extreme cold. Even for elementalists of their level, they felt chills. Klaus and Gray were the only ones who didn't seem to have any reactions to this. Klaus in particular had a delighted expression. Alice and Kyle used the fire element to warm themselves, while Reynolds was shaking from the cold, which prompted laughter from Klaus. Reynolds almost wanted to fight with him, but he was unable to. He, however, had no problems with summoning his elemental warrior, which sent Klaus flying. Klaus didn't see it coming, so he was taken by surprise. Gray and the others burst out laughing when they saw this. Kyle, for one, was having a good time. Being with the group was fun and odd. They all behaved like psychopaths. Well, Klaus seems to be one. Gray and Void were mysterious. Alice seemed ordinary, but he knew not to look down on her. After all, being with such people meant she had something special about her as well. He had also seen her ferocity when fighting, which was something even most men didn't have. Klaus picked himself up and glared at Reynolds. He almost wanted to attack, but seeing the elemental warrior floating beside him, he stopped himself. Reynolds snorted when he saw this, annoying Klaus in the process. The group was forced to hurry up when they heard the fast approaching footsteps of the beast chasing after them. Chapter 689. They walked for around 1 more minute or so, before reaching what seemed like the entrance to a cave. The front of this cave was sealed with ice. Gray was a little confused. Void didn't have the water element, so there was nothing he had to do with ice or anything related to water. But he decided to believe in him. After all, every time he had said there was something beneficial to him, he was always correct. Void, you and the others should keep whatever's following us busy. Kyle and I will try to burn a hole in this ice for us to go through, Gray said. They've both tried to use the space element, but there seems to be a restriction inside, or maybe it was a special feature of the ice that stopped people from getting past it with the space element. Kyle had a special flame just like him, and he had sensed the intensity of the flame. It was just below his own. The group agreed with his plan and went forward to confront the beast. Void was the main attacker. The others were there to distract the beast. Seeing the group leave, Gray turned to Kyle. We should get to work as well. I don't think they'll have a good time with that thing. Gray snickered when said this, which made Kyle chuckle. They increased the heat of their flames to the highest, before unleashing it on the ice wall. A few seconds after they started, they overheard the sound of battle. The others had intercepted the beast, and had started a battle with it. The duo used the fire element to its peak. However, they were unable to create a hole in the ice wall even after over 2 minutes of constant burning. Whenever the flame got close to the ice wall, it would seem as if it was about to be frozen by the ice wall. At first, the reaction was minimal, but as time went on, the ice wall actively started to attack the moment it sensed the flames. Our flames are too weak for it, Gray said with a grim expression. I've heard of this ice before. It's a rare treasure. It can counterattack on its own. If I'm not wrong, there's a magical beast inside of the ice attribute. Kyle's expression was the same as Gray's. At this rate, it would almost be impossible for them to break through this ice seal. Gray looked at Kyle. He seems to know a lot. He thought to himself. He knew about magical beasts having only the ice attribute. It was just like the ice dragon they encountered in the trial land. Unlike humans, they couldn't gain the ability of ice from the water element alone. If a dragon or any other magical beast can use both ice and water, then it would be regarded as a dual elementalist. Is there a way to counter it? Gray asked. They were running low on time. He could hear from the battle that the beast the others were fighting was by no means an easy foe. The darkness element should do the trick, Kyle replied. Oh, easy then. We'll go over to the battle and switch places with Void, Gray said. He didn't want Kyle to know he had more than the 4 elements he had shown. Even in the Aurora continent, having 4 elements was already something rare. If he displayed 5, then it would send waves throughout the continent. All right. Kyle nodded before heading in the direction the others were. Gray took a look at the ice with an intrigued expression, but he didn't stay for long. When they got there, Klaus's figure was sent flying by the beast. Bang! He crashed into the wall close to the duo. Ouch! That's going to hurt, Gray said with a mocking smile. Klaus stood up, looking rattled from the attack. He soon caught sight of Gray. Have you opened up a hole? Even if it's small enough just to crawl through, I won't mind. Gray laughed when he saw Klaus's condition. The fact that Klaus didn't even reply him when he mocked him showed how difficult the battle was. Nope, you'll have to continue fighting that beast for now, Gray said with a laugh. What are you doing here then? Klaus almost wanted to punch Gray in the head. They were fighting their butts off against a seemingly impossible opponent, and Gray came to laugh at them. He was incensed. Oh, I came to see how you guys were coping. From the look of things, you don't seem to be doing fine. Gray continued poking fun at Klaus. Kyle stifled a laugh. He wanted to tell Klaus that they were unable to break it, but he didn't want to spoil Gray's fun. You'll get it from us when we leave this place, Klaus threatened. Why are you here bickering with me? You're using this as an excuse not to go back, right? Gray said with a cunning laugh. He made sure his voice was loud enough so the others who were fighting would hear him. Klaus almost felt like crying. The truth was, he truly was using this as an excuse. The beast was too powerful, and for some reason, it seemed to hate ice. It started targeting him the second he used ice. When he saw Gray, he thought he would use the chance to at least catch his breath. For the first time in his life, his ice ability he was so proud of almost wanted to kill him. Kyle was unable to hold in his life when he saw Klaus's wronged expression. Klaus, what are you doing? Reynolds' voice came from the other side. Klaus glared at Gray before rushing back. Gray laughed before following behind him. He was still laughing after getting the better of Klaus for the first time in a while, but on seeing the beast they were fighting against, he froze with his eyes twitching. You gotta be kidding me. Chapter 690. You gotta be kidding me. Gray's eyelids twitched as he looked at the magical beast. It was a gigantic bunny, with blue fluffy fur, cute big round eyes, and long ears. However, all Gray saw was a sadistic bunny, and it creeped him out. He hated to admit it, but he had a fear of bunnies. The bunny he saw in the trial land made him have an inbuilt fear for them. He felt like behind all those cuteness and fluffiness, there was a sadistic maniac waiting to haunt someone. If people were to find out he thought this way about bunnies, it would be strange how they would react. What are you doing here? Alice asked when she saw Gray. We were unable to break through the ice seal. Gray told them what Kyle told him. After hearing his explanation, they initially wanted to question him why he didn't break it, but they quickly figured out that he probably didn't want Kyle to know he had other elements. Void, I'll take it from here. We'll leave the opening to you. Gray switched places with Void the second he finished speaking. Kyle was shocked when he saw this. He had seen other space elementalists before, but none has been able to do what Gray just did. It must be a secret technique from his faction or family, Kyle thought to himself. After switching places with Void, Gray didn't dally. He might be scared of bunnies, but it didn't mean he couldn't attack. With a wave of his hand, 2 inscriptions lit up in the air, unleashing powerful attacks at the bunny. The bunny shook its body, and its fur stood straight. To the surprise of Gray, his attacks were easily absorbed by the bunny. The bunny attacked while doing this. Gray was caught by surprise, since he thought the bunny would at least take some time to defend against his attack. FCK, he exclaimed. Before he could escape with the space element, the paw of the bunny slammed into his body, sending him flying like a kite. He was previously standing mid-air with the help of the wind element. This made the attack of the bunny even more effective. Bang, boom. Gray slammed into the wall, causing a large and deep crater to form. The force almost created a hole in the wall. Had that happened, they would have been in trouble since they were underwater. They didn't know how deep it was, so they couldn't take any chances. It was common knowledge that the pressure at the depth of the ocean was terrifying. Klaus laughed at Gray when he saw his situation, but he soon ran for his life when the bunny tried to attack him again. Kyle attacked as well. With Void gone, none of them could possibly keep the bunny in check. Unless Gray used the fusion state, he was no match from Void, much less this bunny. Gray managed to crawl out of the crater, cursing his bad luck for encountering a bunny before he rushed over. Boom, bang. They attacked ferociously, but cautiously as well. They couldn't afford to break the walls. Luckily, they were all in the Overlord plane, so they had control over the attacks even though they've already unleashed them. Most of the attacks that missed the bunny were dissolved by the person who used it. Gray and Klaus were the main people who suffered at the hands of the bunny, Klaus especially. Now Gray understood why Klaus said the bunny hated ice. It couldn't use its fur to absorb it like the other elemental attacks, so they deal a good amount of damage to it. Gray was stuck between using his water element or not. In the end, he decided against it. Since he didn't use his darkness element to unseal the ice wall, there was no use showing Kyle any other element. They fought with the bunny, trying to defend Klaus as he used his ice to harm the bunny. Gray was the main person distracting the bunny. With his space element, it was difficult for the bunny to catch him, although there have been quite a few times he was unlucky. He mostly escapes from its attacks. Kyle and Reynolds' elemental warrior were behind Gray. Then lastly was Alice. She was sensible with her positioning, so she rarely got in the attack range of the bunny. Reynolds was also trying to attack, but he mostly ran whenever targeted by the bunny. After almost 5 minutes. Haven't Void opened it yet? Klaus asked. His face was slightly swollen from the attacks, same as Gray. The others were in the same state as when they started the battle. For some reason, the bunny placed its focus on Gray and Klaus. It targeted Klaus because of his ice, and Gray because it felt his space element was a pain to deal with. Void. Gray communicated with Void telepathically. After a few seconds, Void replied, "Almost done. The hole isn't big enough for you guys. I'll still need a little more time," replied Void. He said the hole isn't big enough for us, and he'll need more time. Gray reported the news to the others. Bam! Klaus was once again sent flying. This time, he didn't even get the chance to step into the battle before the bunny sent him flying. Can we crawl through it? Klaus asked, almost on the verge of tears. Just wait till it's big enough, Alice said. Boom, bang. Gray was sent flying, crashing next to Klaus. Can we crawl through it? He asked Void the moment he regained himself. He hated the bunny. It was almost as if it was impenetrable. No matter how he attacked, it would shake its body, and its fur would stand straight, absorbing the attacks. Well, yeah, but I can get it to the size you guys can walk through in a few minutes, Void replied strangely. He never expected Gray to ask such a question. The only reason Gray didn't use this option was that if they wanted to crawl through it, it would take some time before each person entered, making the bunny take advantage of that to beat up the others. The last person would suffer the most, and he was certain that he would be the last person if they went with this choice. Chapter 691. Gray could only grit his teeth as he jumped back into the battle. Klaus followed behind him as well. Boom, bang, bam. They continued fighting against the bunny, and as usual, Gray and Klaus were beaten brutally by it. 2 minutes later, thud. Gray and Klaus could barely stand after crashing into the wall once again. They've created so many craters in the wall that it almost looked like they were following a certain pattern. One thing that was worth mentioning was that they never slammed into any position twice. The bunny also knew the dangers of causing a hole in the tunnel, so it made sure not to send them flying in the same direction. Gray and Klaus were on their knees panting for air. They exchanged looks, and they could see the frustration and terror in each other's eyes. They've managed to at least cause the bunny some harm, but compared to their current state, it didn't seem worth it. I hate bunnies, Gray said hatefully in his head. Just as he was about to stand up, he heard Void's voice in his head. It felt like he was listening to his savior. You guys can come now, Void said. We can finally leave, Gray said with much difficulty. When Klaus heard this, he didn't even think twice before sprinting in that direction. He didn't want to stay here any longer. This was the first time he had been beaten this seriously. What was annoying was that almost all their attacks were useless against the bunny. Gray told the others about the news, and just like Klaus, he ran. He had a greater fear of staying here than Klaus. If not for the fact that he needed to tell the others, he would have run the second he heard the news. The bunny, seeing them trying to run away, ditched the others it was fighting against, and gave chase after the duo. Reynolds, Alice, and Kyle heaved a sigh of relief as they also ran in the same direction. When they got there, Klaus and Gray were nowhere to be seen. It was obvious that they had gone past the hole. Hurry, it's gradually sealing. Void's voice came from inside the small tunnel he made in the ice. The others exchanged glances before rushing into it. The bunny was preoccupied with defending against the ice wall. When it tried to stop Gray and Klaus, it caused a reaction from the ice wall, and it retaliated. This was also one of the causes that hastened the resealing of the ice. They successfully went into the tunnel, finally escaping from the paws of the hateful bunny. Walking through the ice tunnel, the group were amazed. They could see that on the sides of the ice was water. The ice tunnel surprisingly took them through the water, taking them to another cave. While walking, they saw a large shadow move past the water. Even while being in the ice tunnel, the aura they sensed from the shadow sent a chill down their spines. They all froze momentarily from fear. What was that? Klaus asked. Something we shouldn't concern ourselves with. Void, hurry, please, Gray urged Void. The bunny was a small fry compared to the shadow they just saw. One has to know that this ice was extremely thick and tough, yet the shadow's aura still not only seeped through, but it also terrified them. This showed just how powerful the creature was. From the looks of it, it might just be able to kill them with its aura alone. Void nodded his head aggressively before hurrying with the corrosion. Gray switched places with Klaus, secretly using his darkness element as well. He couldn't take the risk of staying here anymore. What if the shadow saw them and took interest in them? For it to survive at this depth showed it was extremely powerful. It could probably smack the ice into smithereens. After a few more minutes, they managed to step out of another cave. This one had what seemed like an oasis, with a floating dark item in the middle. That's it, Void exclaimed when he saw the dark item. He was the first to step out, so the others naturally didn't see it until they stepped out as well. When they caught sight of the floating item, They knew it was definitely something special. Kyle looked at Void, dumbfounded by the fact that he was actually able to accurately locate the treasure after getting close. His attention quickly switched from Void to Klaus. The reason was that without Klaus, this might not have been possible. Void said he couldn't sense the precise location of the treasure when they entered the compound, and the group forced Klaus to use his gut feeling. He somehow brought them here, relying purely on luck. That was unheard of. Klaus's level of luck was on another level entirely. Kyle didn't think he had seen anyone as lucky as Klaus. If anyone was luckier than Klaus, then that person wouldn't even need to cultivate before they got to the top of the world. Whatever made this ice should be here, correct? Gray shifted his gaze from the treasure to Kyle. Should be. There's a possibility it was made years ago as well. I can't be too certain, but since it can regenerate this quickly, the beast should be here, Kyle replied. He hadn't sensed any living thing here, hence he was a little skeptical. This was why he told Gray there's a chance that the beast wasn't here. All right. Gray nodded. Collecting the treasure was entirely up to when Void wanted to. He was more interested in this ice. If he could catch the beast that made it, then it would be easier. He could just learn from it. Klaus would benefit from it as well. Void didn't rush in approaching the treasure. He knew it wouldn't be that easy to take the treasure. There would definitely be an obstacle. If he rushed, then he might harm himself needlessly. Chapter 692. Void examined the place a little longer. Only after he was sure there was no danger did he finally step forward. Klaus, on the other hand, went towards the water. There might be something special in it. After all, a treasure formed here. He wasn't too optimistic about finding any though. When he got close to the water, he, unfortunately, found nothing good. With no choice, he went to the side to watch the others. He didn't have the energy to explore the place. The beating he received from the bunny made him depressed. His face was back to normal thanks to Gray's light element, but the light element couldn't heal his emotions, which were almost destroyed by the bunny. Hateful creature, he thought spitefully. Unknown to Gray, he was gaining a new bunny hater. Well, it can't really be called hate, more like fear. This encounter made Gray's fear of bunnies increase to a new height. Presently, he felt all bunnies were psychotic things that should be avoided at all costs. Void was about to cross the small lake before hastily retreating. Boom! The water exploded out from below, causing a large amount of water to spray in all directions. Seeing the water, Klaus's expression changed drastically. Don't allow the water to touch you, he yelled while covering himself within an ice dome. Gray teleported out of the range of the attack, same as Void. Kyle and Alice used the fire element to create a fire wall to protect themselves. Reynolds' elemental warrior was still by his side, so he didn't have any problems with blocking the water. When the water landed on the ground, it gave off a black gas before fading. It's contaminated, Klaus said with a grim expression. The darkness element truly is something else. Reynolds commented, I'm afraid this isn't a result of the darkness element alone. Look at the lake, and you'll know it's either set to attack once someone wants to pass over it, or there's something inside or around controlling it, Kyle stated. Void looked at the lake, and with a snort, he blinked and appeared beside the object floating in the air. The moment he appeared close to it, a powerful repulsion force pushed him away, and when he got to the top of the lake, the force stopped and the water below him shot up. This time it was different from the first time. It shot at only Void, minimizing the area to increase speed. Klaus was the closest to the lake, and he reacted accordingly. With Void caught off guard, it was up to him to protect him. He created a thin ice veil that stopped the water from touching Void. Void hurriedly left the place, appearing beside Gray. He was clearly shaken from his close encounter. There's something here, Gray said with squinted eyes. What Void just experienced was caused by the wind element. This place must have been created a long time ago to train people, but now it was no longer what it was. Different types of creatures have occupied the place, and with the aid of the trials set here, they were incredibly dangerous. The attack from the lake seemed natural, but the repulsion Void felt when he appeared close to the treasure wasn't natural. Even though it was faint, Gray sensed elemental particles. This could only be possible when someone or something was using elemental attacks. What now? Klaus asked. They couldn't advance since there was an unknown enemy, but they couldn't stay here either. His greatest worry was leaving this place altogether. There was no way to return the way they came, which meant there was another way to leave this place, and it should be connected to this place. We should find our opponent first. Then we'll think of what action to take next, Gray said while looking around. He still hadn't been able to sense what was attacking, but whatever it is was protecting the treasure. Void, try approaching it again. You already know of its attack, so you wouldn't be caught off guard again, Gray said to Void. This was the quickest way to find what was attacking. All he had to do was track where the elemental particles were coming from. Only extremely sensitive elementalists could attempt what he wanted to do. This is the reason the others didn't know it was an elemental attack, but he did. Having multiple elements gave him extra sensitivity to elemental particles. He concentrated fully on the area where the treasure was floating. After Void disappeared, he appeared there within a second. Like the first time, a powerful repulsion force pushed him to the top of the lake. Void wouldn't fall for this the second time, so he vanished before his figure got to the lake. Gray traced the elemental particles and realized it was coming from the ground around a place that had flowers around. After tracking it, he went over to where it was coming from, and without warning, he sliced a large lump from the ground, taking out at least a meter worth of soil. Looking at the ground, he found nothing. Strange. I could have sworn it was coming from here, he muttered to himself. While he was looking at the ground, the lump of soil he sliced out started to move. Something small was wiggling around in it. The others who were standing around Gray noticed this and retreated back subconsciously. A few seconds later, a creature popped out of the lump of soil. It was around 6 inches tall and had a face of a child, with eyes and a mouth, but no nose or ears. It was translucent with a mixture of blue and green colors. It had arms but no legs. The group stared at the somewhat cute yet strange creature with interest. Gray had been alerted to this, so he saw the creature when it was leaving the lump of soil. His gaze was fixated on the creature, before looking at Kyle, who looked like someone who had seen a ghost. A cely? But how? He muttered in shock. Gray had read about a cely before, so hearing Kyle say the name, he was a little taken aback. From what he knew, they were almost extinct in the world. He never thought they'd encounter one here. Chapter 693. A cely. I thought they were extinct, Alice asked, surprised. Apparently not, there's one right here, Klaus replied while looking at the cely with interest. This little guy was behind that troublesome ice. Cely's form from a place of concentrated elemental essence. It usually takes years for them to form and gain intelligence from the looks of it. It hasn't been long since this one formed, hence its somewhat low intelligence. A smarter cely would know not to come out in the presence of people. These magical creatures were highly coveted by people because if absorbed, they could help improve one's elemental grade and mastery of their element. This cely was special in the sense that it had 2 elements. A dual elemental cely was rare to see, even when they weren't almost extinct. The cely looked at the group with interest. It hadn't left this place since it formed, so this was the first time it was encountering something different from magical beasts or phantoms. It couldn't speak, so other than staring at the group, it did nothing else. Alice was drawn to it immediately, and she thought of capturing it as a partner. It's extremely difficult to gain the trust of a cely. Kyle saw through her intentions and said, "Whoever manages to acquire its trust will be its partner. Deal?" Klaus asked. There was only one cely, and there were 5 people here. Void was excluded, since well, he was already a partner to Gray, and magical beasts don't usually have other magical creatures as partners. Gray nodded, having no issues with Klaus's suggestion. The same goes for the others. Kyle never thought they'd use such a method. This was cely, something that even relatives would fight over to get, yet these people said whoever could gain its trust would acquire it. What if the first person who stepped forward gained its trust immediately? What would happen to the others? While Kyle was thinking of how carefree the group were, Klaus was the first to step forward. The moment he approached the cely, it attacked instinctively. With the aid of the wind element, it pushed him back while ice spikes sprang out from the ground, almost impaling Klaus. Klaus reacted quickly and evaded the attack. What's wrong with the world? Now cute things only have murderous intentions towards me, he complained while cleaning the sweat off his forehead. If he didn't react fast, he would have been injured. In the space of 30 minutes, 2 cute creatures had threatened his life. This was unacceptable. Next, he said grumpily. He couldn't try again for now. Reynolds was the next to step forward. He raised his hand above his head as if to show he didn't have any dangerous intentions toward the cely. He managed to get close to the cely, unlike Klaus, but it attacked as well. His elemental warrior blocked the attack, but its appearance frightened the cely, and it continued attacking. Reynolds was forced to retreat. "Wanna try?" Gray looked at Kyle, who shook his head. As tempting as this looked, it was also very dangerous. This cely hasn't used its full strength yet. From what he could tell, it should be at the first stage of the sage plane. Once it's frightened to a certain stage, it would attack with its full strength, and the group would be in danger at that time. Gray turned to Alice, and she was already walking toward the cely with a calm smile. She didn't make any movements. After getting to within 10 meters of the cely, a smile broke out on her face as she whipped out her secret weapon. It was none other than a piece of meat she kept from Gray's last cooking. She used her fire element to warm it up, and its rich aroma wafted through the entire place. The cely wanted to attack, but the second it perceived the aroma of the meat, it froze. Its previous noseless face saw a change, and a nose magically appeared on it as it took in a deep breath. The others saw it drooling as it stared at the piece of meat in Alice's hand. Gray and the others were stumped. They never thought Alice would use a method like this. She was obviously baiting the cely. Once the cely got a taste of this, it would definitely want more, and the only way to get it is by following the person who gave the food to it first. My chance is gone. A shame. I would have liked to have one of these. I read that they form a bond with their partners, and once it's formed, even if people tried to steal the cely, it would be useless. And they can also merge with their partners during battles, aiding their partners with their elements. Gray communicated with Void telepathically. Once a cely creates this bond with their partners, they transfer their essence to them. This would have no effect whatsoever on the cely, but if people were to steal it later in the future for its essence, it would be worthless. Then the aspect of merging would give the elementalist an added element. Unfortunately, this can only be possible when merged. Alice, for instance, already has 2 elements. If she manages to form a bond with this cely, she would gain 2 more if they merge. Unfortunately, it was extremely difficult for people to create these bonds, since only the cely can initiate them. "You don't need this thing. I'm more than enough," Void replied proudly. Gray laughed without making any comments. Void was annoyed by the laugh, but let him be and focused his attention on the cely. Alice had been able to get within 3 meters of the cely, and the closer she got to it, the more it drooled, fixing its gaze on the piece of meat throughout. Before long, Alice was standing in front of it. She still had her amiable smile. Squatting down, she took the meat closer to the cely. At first, the cely didn't make any movements, but after a while, it was unable to hold itself back anymore and pounced on the meat, devouring it. Alice didn't let go of the meat throughout the time. Only when it got to the last part of it did she give it to the cely. Chapter 694. The cely finished the entire piece of meat while looking at Alice. Although there wasn't any sort of intimacy in its eyes, it didn't seem to feel threatened by her any longer. Alice was still in the same squatting position, bringing out another piece of meat. She saw a delighted expression on the face of the cely which made her smile. She used the fire element to heat up the meal, but made sure it was not too hot. This time, she gave the entire piece to the cely before it started eating. It seemed to gain a small amount of trust in her, since it let her touch it. But after a while, it retreated. Alice didn't feel down by this. She knew it wasn't going to happen so easily. But at least this was a start. "Can I get the treasure now?" Void asked Gray. "No, only after she's managed to at least become friends with it. If not, it might think she's only trying to deceive it." Gray shook his head. With nothing left to do, the group could only sit by the side and watch. It would take a while before Alice would be able to form a relationship with the cely, and they weren't really in a hurry. According to what they know, it would take at least 1 week before the miasma will cover the parts it has exposed, so they still had some time. In the blink of an eye, 2 days went by. During these 2 days, Alice was constantly with the cely, trying to communicate with it. At first, it had difficulties understanding her, but as time went on, it started to show it could understand some of the words she was saying. When do you think we'll be able to leave this place? Klaus asked, bored. Very soon. I think she's made considerable progress with the cely. Reynolds was the one who replied. How lucky. Klaus shook his head wryly. When he brought up the suggestion, he felt he had a chance in creating a relationship with the cely. Who would have thought that Alice would be the one to benefit from it in the end? Had he known, he would have said they should fight for it. Thinking about it, he knew that would have been worse since Gray would beat them up. It's better if Alice gets it. Gray already has so much, adding this to his power would just be unfair to the world. Klaus thought while looking at Gray. Gray noticed his gaze and smiled as if he could hear what he was saying in his head. Klaus shook his head to dispel those thoughts, before hoping that things would move quicker between Alice and the cely. Luckily for them, Alice told them they could take the treasure later that day. Void was excited when he heard this, and before Alice completed her statement, he had already appeared there. Wait, if you take the treasure, a portal will open, transporting us back to the mansion. It will only stay open for 5 seconds. Alice stopped Void just before he managed to take the treasure. The others felt a cold chill run down their spines. Without becoming acquainted with the cely, they would have been trapped here for who knows how long. Klaus and Reynolds glared at Void, who gave them an embarrassed smile as he returned to his original position. You can communicate with it. Gray pointed at the cely. Yes, it can transmit its voice to my head. It took a while, but I finally managed to learn how to speak with me. Alice nodded while caressing the head of the cely, which laughed in return. Since you can, have you asked if it wants to come with you? Kyle asked curiously. This was the most vital part. If Alice could create a bond with the cely, it would ward off lurking eyes. It would be impossible for them to keep the cely a secret, since people would see it. The only way it can hide is if it merges with whoever it forms a bond with. If people see that it's already formed a bond with Alice, they would lose interest in it. But if they noticed it hadn't, they would immediately try to capture it. Yes, she agreed to leave with me. I've already told her the dangers, and she agreed to form a bond with me. Alice replied with a smile. So easily, Kyle was taken aback. It usually takes people years before they can make a cely trust them. Yet, in the space of 2 days, Alice not only got the cely to trust her, but she even convinced it to form a bond with her. It was unbelievable. If Kyle wasn't present here, he would never have believed something like this. Great, now do your thing. I want to leave here as soon as possible, Klaus urged. Alice laughed before communicating with the cely. A few seconds later, a light thread came out from the head of the cely and shot at Alice's forehead. After connecting with her forehead, the thread tightened before both parties were covered with a bright light. Alice had 2 elements, the fire and lightning element, so she gave off red and silver lights. The cely had 2 elements, ice and wind, so it gave off light blue and green colors respectively. The lights increased before becoming a cocoon that covered both Alice and the cely. The group waited for almost 10 hours before the cocoon showed signs of breaking. When it broke, Alice was the only one inside. Her aura had changed slightly. She broke through to the 5th stage of the Overlord plane. After forming a bond with the cely, she was already very close to the 5th stage. So after getting the essence of the cely, she advanced to the 5th stage. This was just the beginning. With the aid of the cely's essence, she would advance quicker until she catches up with it. The group congratulated her when she came out. It's time to head out. Void rushed towards the treasure once again. Chapter 695. In the West Wing, at one of the halls, a portal opened and 5 humans and a cat rushed out of it. When they stepped out, there were 4 people in that hall, and all of them were either in the 8th stage of the Overlord plane or the 9th stage. After Void took the treasure, everyone in the place sensed it. It was what brought people here. So the second it was acquired, its aura disappeared completely. There are a few people who have ways of searching for these sorts of things. These 4 were part of those people. Seeing Gray and his friends come out from a portal meant that they got something powerful, and the aura of the treasure disappeared almost at the same time the portal appeared. Hand it over, a young lady who looked to be around 20 years old asked coldly. She was wearing purple clothes with long gold hair. Hand what over? Klaus asked haughtily. He had always hated people like this. They didn't even know them yet they were asking them to hand something over. The treasure. If you still enjoy living, I'd suggest you do so quietly. The young lady spoke again. What treasure? Klaus decided the best choice of action was to feign ignorance. No matter what, he would deny this till the end. The young lady was starting to lose her patience when they heard the footsteps of others. Hearing the footsteps, a grin formed on Gray's face, and he threw something in their direction. He waited for the time the new arrivals would step in. That way, they would see the item being given to them, but they wouldn't know what it was. The most annoying part was that he was going to use the space element to keep the item back in his storage ring. Besides, the treasure wasn't with him. He only threw a shabby black plaque at the group. The young lady stretched out her hand trying to catch the item, but it disappeared soon after. However, to the group that just arrived, she hid it in her storage ring. The second it touched her hand. "We've given it to you, and let us pass." Klaus quickly caught what Gray was trying to do and said, making sure the people who came in just now heard of it. "What are you talking about?" the young lady asked, annoyed. Gray threw something in her direction, and just as she was about to catch it, it vanished. She was still trying to understand the reason behind that before Klaus spoke. The group that just arrived had 8 people in it, and 3 of them were in the 9th stage of the Overlord plane. "Please, let us pass. We've already given the treasure to you." Reynolds joined in on the act as well. The leader of the new group walked over, standing behind the group of 4. "What are you people talking about?" he asked with a raised brow. "HMPH, this is none of your business." The young lady snorted coldly. From how she responded, it was obvious that she was acquainted with this young man, and their relationship was by no means good. "Care to explain?" The young man didn't bother with her, and turned to Gray's group. Klaus told them what happened. According to him, they accidentally entered a room that took them to another space. They saw an item lying on the ground. After picking it up, they were transported here. These people saw them when they came out and took it from them. The young lady looked at Klaus with bulging eyes. "Shut up, you liar," she scolded angrily. "You see, she's trying to silence us so she could take the treasure for herself," Klaus pointed out. Even the 3 people with the young lady had confused expressions. They didn't know what Gray threw at her, but they knew she caught something and hid it immediately. There was no way they were going to know if Gray's group was lying or not, and the young lady had no way to justify herself, since they saw her catching the item. "Is she trying to trick us as well?" This was the only question in the heads of the young lady's companions. A treasure of this caliber was something that would make friends betray each other, so it was not unexpected that they started to doubt the young lady. When she saw the looks from the others, she felt irritated. "Can't you see they're trying to frame me?" she questioned in anger. "Bullshit. You're obviously trying to keep the treasure for yourself," Klaus retorted before anyone could even speak up. "I'll kill you." The young lady was finding it difficult to keep her cool. "Search her and you'll know that we're not lying," Klaus suggested, irritating the young lady even further. She was from a major family in a high-leveled region. She was traveling when she heard about this treasure, hence she came. She would obviously have some rare treasures with her, so it was unwise for her to allow others to search her storage ring. "Come on, just let us have a look at the treasure," the young man from the new group said with a smile. "What treasure? I don't have any treasure," the young lady said angrily. "That's exactly what we said. But what happened when you threatened us? We handed what we saw over to you." "Threaten her? I'm sure she'll confess if you do so," Klaus interjected. The young lady looked at Klaus with hateful eyes. But for some reason, the person she hated the most was Gray. If he hadn't thrown that strange item at her, no one would have been able to pressure her. "Camille, just hand it over and move on. There are other treasures here. With your strength, you'll get something good," the young man said. "I don't have any treasure," the young lady referred to as Camille replied. She was still trying to calm herself down when she heard Klaus's next statement. She almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "Strip her if she doesn't agree," Klaus said with a menacing smile. Camille looked at Klaus, and she was sure she would never hate anyone as much as she presently hated him. Chapter 696. Gray looked at Klaus with an odd expression, while Reynolds held in his laugh. Alice, on the other hand, looked like she wanted to beat him up. Kyle looked at the group, terrified of their evil ways. He knew Gray had the space element, and the treasure was not with him to start with, so whatever he threw at the young lady was crap. He took it back with the space element, but most people would think it was the young lady hiding it in her spatial ring. An ingenious plan, with Klaus there to escalate things. It was nothing short of brilliant. The fact that they didn't even need to speak to each other to understand their plans made them even more frightening. He crossed his heart never to offend them. If he knew anyone that tried to offend them, he would caution the person against it while apologizing in their stead. Klaus was an evil maniac. Gray was silent and deadly. Camille flew into rage and attacked Klaus when she heard his statement. More evidence. Klaus yelled as he dodged the attack. Even though Camille was in the 9th stage and was stronger, it didn't mean that she could beat him up with him being unable to retaliate. He was in the 7th stage of the Overlord plane, after all. However, when they felt the power of her attack, they knew the difference in strength between geniuses in the mid and high-leveled regions. Gray could fight against a genius in mid-level regions that were in the 9th stage of the Overlord plane without much difficulty. But those in high-leveled regions were a different story. Although they didn't know she was from a high-leveled region, they were able to guess when they noticed her cultivation stage. Most of the people her age in mid-level regions were still in the early or mid stages of the Overlord plane, but she was already very close to the peak of the Overlord plane. Boom! Her attack slammed into the wall, destroying it. Klaus breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the state of the wall. I can't believe I irritated such a demon, he thought internally. The young man stopped Camille from attacking. They were here for this treasure, and if he had to cross blows with Camille to get it, he would. They were from the same region, and both families didn't take each other as allies, so they could fight against each other. Hand it over. He motioned to the rest of his companions, and 4 of them came forward to surround Camille and her group. The other 3 went to block off the escape route of Gray and his friends. The people who came were in the 7th stage, all 3 of them. Gray knew this young man wouldn't believe them completely, but this was all they needed. Once he shifts all his focus to Camille, they could easily deal with these guys. With him, Klaus, and Reynolds' elemental warrior, they would be able to deal with these guys. Then there's also Void and Kyle as well. This meant that before the young man and Camille could figure out what was happening, they would be able to escape with ease. All they had to do was to wait till the battle between Camille and the young man became heated. Just wait here. Once he's confirmed that the treasure is with her, then you can leave. Since we're here, why don't you people hand over your treasures? You can't tell me that was the only treasure you found. One of the 3 young men who surrounded the group said with a smirk. Oh, doesn't that mean you guys have also gotten treasures along the way as well? Gray asked curiously. Why are you asking? You want to take them from us? One of the young men mocked. They felt Gray and his group wouldn't fare to attack, since they had a 9th stage Overlord plane genius with them, and not only one for that matter. You know what? That's exactly what we want to do. Gray looked at his friends before flashing a bright smile at the 3 young men. Camille had already started to fight with the young man and his group. She was irritated by Klaus, so she could barely keep herself in check. Their fight was already getting to a heated state. This was enough time for Gray and his friends to take out these 3. They didn't plan on killing them, robbing them was enough. With Void with him, he didn't need to be scared of not being able to access the storage rings. Since their owners are still alive, Void could easily go in and out of his storage ring. These ones would be no different. When the others heard Gray's words, they smiled and attacked simultaneously. The trio never expected that Gray and his friends would truly attack them. Hence they were caught off guard, even after Gray told them they wanted to rob them. Kyle was once again dumbfounded by how the head of these 4 worked. He wasn't sure there would be anyone who would have the guts to attack in a situation like this. But Gray and his friends obviously didn't care about being hunted down by Camille and the young man. What have I gotten myself into? He asked himself. But there was one thing he couldn't deny, moving around with them was exciting. He hadn't felt this agitated in a long time. His blood was pumping and he joined the group in their attack. Before Camille and the young man's groups figured out what was wrong, Gray and his friends were gone. The 3 young men who were supposed to block them were on the floor, with only their underwear. The rest of their clothes were stripped from their bodies. Without even asking, everyone knew who the culprit behind that particular act was. If not Klaus, who else? In another hallway, Klaus was laughing like a psychopath as he threw the clothes of the young men outside the building. Chapter 697. Kyle looked at the laughing Klaus. He couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. The speed at which Klaus was able to strip the men was shocking. From how he did it so quickly, he knew this was not Klaus's first rodeo. Why would someone derive joy in something like this? He thought to himself. The group rushed out of the hallway and entered another one. This place was massive, so as long as they ran, it would be impossible for these people to find them. Well, unless they were unlucky and met them again. You're a psycho. Alice looked at Klaus with disgust. They deserved it. Klaus laughed menacingly. Reynolds laughed as well. Gray shook his head when he saw their proud expressions. They obviously had no shame in what they did. Alice scoffed and continued walking down the hallway. Even though they had gotten the main treasure they came here for, and even got a bonus in the cely, they couldn't leave the place without searching for any other thing. They didn't stay in that section of the mansion, opting to head to the main building. Even though it was populated, they would be able to find some things there. 30 minutes later, Gray and the group appeared in one of the rooms, and there were people there fighting for something. Klaus suggested that they waited till they finished fighting. If the treasure was something valuable, then they would snatch it. Unfortunately, the people who were fighting there didn't let them. Seeing them entering the place, the two groups stopped fighting and looked at them. No one wanted to be taken advantage of. Leave, the two groups said simultaneously. What are you fighting for? Klaus asked with a playful smile. It's none of your business, leave. A young man in the 8th stage of the Overlord plane stepped forward. He was the one with the highest cultivation stage in the room, so he felt he had the right to speak to the group. Sorry. What did you say? Klaus made a face. I can't hear you, because I don't listen to bullshit. In fact, leave now and you'll keep the things you've already acquired. Klaus interrupted the young man when he was about to speak again. Klaus's words annoyed him and he attacked, since he was stronger. So he felt Klaus had no right to speak to him as he wanted. Unfortunately for him, this was the worst decision he could make. Klaus didn't even think twice and retaliated. With a wave of his hand, a stream of water appeared and rushed towards the young man's attack. He also made his special heavy water, hiding it inside the attack. Due to the effect of the water, his attack easily destroyed the attack of the young man, and rushed toward him. The young man was taken aback, but he prepared himself to defend against the attack. He was in for the surprise of his life. The 7th stage Overlord plane elementalist he was looking down on trounced him brutally. Klaus didn't even hold his hand, attacking viciously. After his first attack caught the young man off guard, he continued his assault. The rest of the people in the young man's group were in the 7th and 6th stage. When they tried to join in on the battle, Reynolds summoned his elemental warrior, while Gray stepped in as well. Kyle couldn't stay still as well and attacked. Alice tried her new strength. She broke through to the 5th stage of the Overlord plane recently, and she hadn't tested her strength yet. She picked the person in the 7th stage and attacked. The other group that was previously fighting against the young man's group decided to watch from the side. Now, instead of Gray's group to be the spectators, they were now the ones fighting. They might be strong. After their battle with these people, they would be tired. We can get them then, one of the 7th stage Overlord plane elementalist in the group said. Of the two groups, the one with an Overlord plane in the 8th stage had 6 people, while the other group had 7 people. Their battle was in a stalemate, hence the reason they couldn't afford to allow Gray's group to watch from the side. Even though Gray and his friends were 5, they had no issues with fighting against these 6 people. Void didn't even join in. He was waiting till these people were defeated before he snatched their spatial rings. That was his task. He would only fight when the opponent is in the 9th stage, or at the peak of the Overlord plane. Boom, bang, bam. After almost 5 minutes, Gray and his friends defeated their opponents. I'm still raring to go. Klaus cracked his knuckles and turned to the other group. They've already robbed this group and chased them out. Now, it was the turn of the other group. We'll leave on our own, the leader of this group said. He already knew they were no match from these psychos, and they not only beat their opponents, but they robbed them as well. Hand over your spatial rings and get lost, Klaus demanded. What? One of the ladies in the group asked with an annoyed face. Why are you looking at me? If you were stronger, wouldn't you do the same? Klaus mocked. This was the truth though. It was just like the time they encountered Camille. Had she not felt she was stronger than them, she wouldn't have tried to force them to hand over the treasure. It was the rule of the world. The powerful had the right to rob others. With an annoyed expression, the group handed over their storage rings and left. All their savings were in there, and even the treasures they were given by their families were taken as well. What a bargain. We should do this often. Klaus laughed. You do know this will bring in a lot of enemies your way, right? Kyle couldn't help but ask. Of course, but how can your life be fun without enemies? Who would feel sad when they see you make it? Klaus said. Learn to create enemies, they spice up your life. Klaus went on to advise. Gray shook his head before looking at what the group were originally fighting for. It was surprisingly a small orb, but he could feel a powerful force residing in it. If this thing is destroyed, it would definitely cause a large explosion. Good stuff. Klaus nodded while caressing his chin. When they left the room, they started to move from room to room. The next few rooms didn't produce anything, but they met a few people. Klaus was disappointed when they didn't try to engage them. He didn't want to be the one who initiates the battles. All he wanted was for someone to make an error, and he'll use it as an excuse to fight and rob them. Robbing people was fun. Void certainly agreed with him. They soon got to an intersection, and they decided to split up to maximize the treasures they would find. Reynolds and Klaus took one path, and to Gray's surprise, Void voted to go with them. Gray couldn't stop him, so he let him go with them. Alice and Carl took another path, while Gray picked the last path. He wanted to be alone. Moving this way would be more efficient for him. Within a day, news of 2 people and a cat robbing people started to circulate in the mansion. They managed to attract so many haters in the place in the space of a day. If these people had the chance, they would have killed them already. Gray heard of it and knew who it was. If not Klaus, Reynolds, and Void, who else could it be? These people will attract so many enemies that I would have to avoid them when leaving this place. If not, they might kill me, Gray thought. Kyle and Alice also had this thought. If they grouped up with Klaus and Reynolds now, they would be in trouble. What is wrong with those friends of yours? Kyle asked. I honestly think you're abnormal, but this is why I enjoy staying with them. They make life interesting, Alice said with a smile. She honestly didn't feel strange after hearing the news. She had heard far worse. When they were in the trial land, Klaus and Reynolds robbed people of their pants. What the hell were they going to do with it? She told Carl of this, and he finally didn't bother with this issue. Klaus and Reynolds were crazy from the get-go, so trying to comprehend what they did or why they did whatever they did is impossible. I'll just take them as they are. The truth is, they're not bad company. Other than causing too much trouble, they're fun to be with, Kyle remarked. Chapter 698. The group stayed their separate ways for almost 3 days. Even when Gray accidentally encountered them, he pretended as if he didn't see them and went the other way. Klaus and Reynolds wanted to go after him, but since people were there, he attacked the duo, which came as a surprise for them, before telling them via the communication device that they've made too many enemies, and he was still too young to die. Klaus and Reynolds naturally didn't take it lying, but when they were ambushed by almost 20 people, they realized maybe they had gone too far. They anonymously decided it was high time they left the mansion. Most people would be trying to recover what they've lost, and since there were possible treasures in some rooms, it was safe to assume that there would be people still inside the mansion. Gray was surprised when he heard their decision, since he didn't expect this to happen. At most, he thought maybe they would hide inside the building for a while. Who would have known they would outright leave? This is for the better, he thought to himself. He wanted to recall Void, but then he remembered that everyone who had been robbed knew about this mysterious black cat, so he decided against it. However, leaving the mansion wouldn't be enough. They would have to leave this region as soon as possible. Most of the people they robbed were from this region, so it would be dangerous if they were caught by them after leaving this place. Alice laughed when she heard Klaus and Reynolds' decision. To think they still know when to use their brains. She chuckled. Kyle felt this was the best decision for the group as well. Most of the people they robbed will stay here for a few more days, so as long as they weren't heard from for the next few days, it would at least help lessen their current fame. The duo left the moment they agreed on the decision. Gray continued exploring this place. There wasn't really much he wanted here. All he found was strange fruits or elemental weapons that were too old. He still hadn't found an elemental weapon on the same level as the multi-elemental weapon he got from that hidden underground in the trial land. Even with his current cultivation stage, the consumption was still too high for him. There had been times when he tried using it, but the amount of essence it uses was too terrifying. While walking in one of the hallways, Gray encountered a familiar face. You. A spiteful voice came from ahead of him. It was that of a young lady, and looking at the face, he tried recalling where he had seen her. Camille, who had hated the group since encountering them, could never forget their faces. Well, Gray and Klaus were especially handsome, so it was quite difficult to forget about them so quickly. When she saw Gray's expression, she knew he didn't recognize her, which irritated her even further. "I'll kill you," she yelled and attacked. "Oh, now I know you. You're that girl who tried to rob us." Gray smacked his lips as he finally recollected who Camille was. Boom. Camille was a lightning elementalist, so her attacks were not something to joke with. Luckily for Gray, she was alone. Let's see how powerful those in high-leveled regions really are. Please don't disappoint me, he thought to himself. He had faced a few geniuses from high-leveled regions when he was traveling to the southern continent, but that was then. Besides, there was a difference in strength between most geniuses. Swoosh, bang, he gathered energy in his legs, and with the aid of the lightning and wind element, he exploded with frightening speed as he dodged the attack. After dodging, he retaliated with an attack of his own. Camille was 2 stages ahead of him, and to his surprise, fighting against her, he felt a slight pressure from her. Boom, bang, bam. They continued exchanging blows, and Camille was obviously on top when it came to strength level. She was on a different level when compared to the geniuses from those mid-level regions. Gray couldn't help but wonder just how different the strengths of geniuses from the high-leveled regions and those in the mid-level regions are. This was exactly why he refused the idea of them joining a faction here. If not in the high-leveled region, then they wouldn't join any faction. Boom, bang. Their battle was intense, but even with Camille's advantage in strength, she still couldn't defeat Gray. Now she understood how Gray played that trick on her. He's not only a multi-elementalist, but he also has the space element, and 2 of his elements are special. Where did such a freak come from? She was internally shocked, but it didn't mean she had a good impression of Gray. They were already enemies, so there was no use in thinking about his talent or not. Bang! Gray was struck by one of her attacks, and it sent him crashing into one of the rooms, bursting through the door. Wow! Gray was impressed by her strength. If he could use all his elements, he naturally wouldn't be at a disadvantage even with the stage difference. But presently, even with 4 elements, and one of them being the space element, he still couldn't keep up with Camille. He decided it was time he brought out his inscriptions. They would be beneficial in distracting her. To his surprise, more inscriptions lit up, and he realized 3 of the 5 in the sky had silver colors. He only created 2, one for his fire, and the other for his lightning. Both were blue and red respectively. He was still wondering where the other 3 inscriptions came from until they attacked him. An inscriber. I never thought she was also like me. Gray was once again amazed by Camille. Oh, you're also an inscriber. This would be fun. Camille's eyes glittered. Chapter 699. Boom, bang, bam. Both inscribers attacked continuously without giving the other party any chance to breathe. Gray had only 2 inscriptions up, but he was able to keep up with Camille, who had 3 inscriptions set up, thanks to his added advantage of having multiple elements. Camille was stronger, and being born in the Aurora continent meant that she was used to fighting against space elementalists. She could defend against them. Space elementalists were troublesome to deal with, but they were not omnipotent. With sufficient experience, people could deal with them. Boom, bang. Camille attacked with a lightning bolt which Gray was able to deflect easily. Gray countered her attack with the fire element. They continued exchanging blows for a few more minutes, with no one being able to gain the upper hand. Camille was shocked by Gray's strength. She was 2 stages ahead of him, yet he was able to fight against her on equal footing. If this was a life and death battle, it was unknown who would win. Well, she still had confidence, since she had a few trump cards that she didn't want to show against someone weaker. It's a shame you're in a lower stage, else I would have loved beating you up. Playtime is over, hand over the treasure, and I'll consider letting you go peacefully. Camille said. What treasure? We don't have anything. The only reason I did what I did was to put you in trouble for annoying us. Nothing else. Gray replied nonchalantly. When Camille heard Gray saying that he purposely did what he did, her facial expression turned distorted. She knew that he purposely did it, but the fact that he was saying it in front of her meant that he didn't fear her. It was like a kid playing a prank against their elder and laughing about it to their face. I don't believe you. Hand it over peacefully, Camille said. The duo had stopped fighting, just watching each other. I can't continue explaining myself. This is something that I don't have. Do you expect me to give you something I don't have? Gray asked. Camille looked at Gray for a few seconds, contemplating about the possibility of using any of her trump cards. After thinking thoroughly, she decided against it. It was a waste of time. We'll meet again. Hopefully you'll be more entertaining, Camille said. With that, she left Gray alone. Gray didn't try to stop her. Fighting against another inscriber was fun, but he had other things to do. With no one to block him, he continued his journey. There was one thing he was sure of: he would encounter Camille or her companions here again. They still had a few days left to stay in the mansion, so he had to make the best of it. Klaus and Reynolds were already outside waiting for the others. Kyle and Alice were still inside, hoping to find another fortuitous encounter. Alice didn't really have too many expectations. The cely she managed to get was enough for her. It not only increased her fighting power, but it also gave her 2 added options in fighting. It was like a double bonus. 3 days went by in a flash, and everyone in the mansion started to rush out of the building, Gray's friends included. The miasma would be returning in a few days' time, and only a few people who still wanted to risk it were inside the mansion. There are a few people who were unable to get anything good while the place was open, so now they felt that with lesser people, they would have a better chance of getting something amazing. Where's Gray? Alice asked Klaus and Reynolds when they came out. He's still inside, Klaus replied. Void was standing on his shoulder, looking at the mansion with interest. They could already see the miasma slowly returning to the mansion. Don't tell me he got greedy, Kyle asked. Although he hadn't been with the group for long, he knew they weren't greedy people. Well, other than Klaus, Reynolds, and the surprisingly talking cat, he was at least 50% sure that Gray wasn't the greedy type. He's not that type. For one thing, he's the most cautious person among us. If he's still in there, either he found something really good, or he's trapped, Alice explained. When they were in the trial land, Gray was the one who urged them to start heading back to the portal even before the time was up. Hopefully, he found something good, Reynolds commented. Alice was still worried, so she tried contacting him. However, he did not respond. Let's wait for a while, Klaus suggested. It wasn't like there was anything they could do anyway. The group nodded and went to a hidden place. Klaus and Reynolds had too many enemies, so staying here where people could see them was too dangerous. Inside the mansion, Gray was rushing through one hallway. Behind him was a large beast. The beast was at the peak of the Overlord plane, and no matter how he tried to attack it, it seemed almost insurmountable. He even tried using the Chaos Orb, but it was inefficient. That was his strongest attack even when in the fusion state. If even that was not effective, then he didn't know what to do. While he was running, he recalled he could still use his fire domain. Without wasting any time, he tried using his domain. In a split second, the hallway was shrouded with hot blazing flames. However, the beast continued chasing him. It was as if it was oblivious to it. What the hell is this? Gray looked at the orb in his hand. This was the reason this beast had been chasing him relentlessly. He had tried everything in his power to lose it, even pushing his space element to the limit. But it was still not enough. On the way, he saw a figure rushing in his direction. It was none other than the young man who fought with Camille. I knew I'd see you again. Hand it over, the young man said. Chapter 700. I knew I'd see you again. Hand it over, the young man said while blocking Gray's path. Gray, who was still thinking of ways to avoid the beast chasing after him, was a little taken aback when he saw the young man. Oh, sure, here. He didn't even think about it twice before tossing the orb in his hand to the young man. At first, he originally didn't want to give up the item, since it was difficult to obtain, but he wasn't going to get himself killed because of it. Since this young man showed up, it was best to hand it over to him. He had already stayed here for too long, and it was time to leave. The young man was stunned, but he still took the item. When he tried to keep it in his storage ring, he was astounded when he realized he couldn't. Bye, Gray said as he ran past him. The young man was still thinking about why the orb didn't enter his storage ring when he sensed a powerful aura rushing toward him. He raised his head only to see a large beast that stood around 2.5 meters galloping at him. Could this thing be chasing that guy? This was his initial thought, so he tried to move to the side to give the beast a chance to chase Gray. However, he realized the beast moved as well, aiming at him. FCK off. He unleashed a powerful attack on the beast. His eyes nearly bulged out when the beast didn't even flinch. What's this? He couldn't sit still any longer. The beast roared and attacked when it got close. Bang! Its large claws slashed at the young man who dodged hastily. The attack hit the wall, creating a large claw mark on the wall. What the? Damn it, I've been scanned. The young man looked in the direction Gray went with hatred. Whatever Gray gave to him was obviously the reason this beast was attacking him. However, for the beast to attack meant that it was something special. He gritted his teeth and contemplated if he should use his trump cards or not. Just like Klaus, he had a talisman that had the attack power of a Sage Plane expert, even an elemental sovereign talisman as well. He was from a powerful family, so it was natural for him to have these for protection. Bang! Boom! The beast didn't think unlike the young man. It attacked continuously without rest. The young man evaded and blocked the attacks, but as time went on, the pressure started to increase. Damn it. I'll take the risk. It better be worth it, he said with gritted teeth while taking out a red talisman. Crushing it, he tossed it at the beast. Boom! A powerful energy exploded out of it, followed by a raging fire. The strength of the attack was on a different level. Even this powerful beast was left almost helpless against the attack of a Sage Plane elementalist. From the second it felt the strength of the attack, it quickly started to prepare its defenses. Unfortunately, it still wasn't enough to protect it. With a painful roar, the beast was sent flying, slamming into the wall before being hit by the leftover attack. Its previously impenetrable body was filled with wounds, and its blood was flowing from them. The young man took advantage of the opportunity and attacked. Bang! Boom! With the beast's injuries, it was only a matter of time before it gave up. When the beast realized that staying here would be its end, it gave up on the orb and ran away. The young man tried to stop it from running, but unless he used one of his talismans, there was no way he could keep it here. What is that beast? The young man looked in the direction the beast ran towards. He couldn't help but think about it. Its defense was on another level completely. He looked at the orb, and his expression softened a little. This was the reason he sacrificed one of his precious talismans. Making them wasn't easy, so naturally they couldn't use them wantonly unless absolutely necessary. Heh, better be worth it, he thought to himself. He tossed it up, however, to his greatest surprise, the orb didn't come down. Hello again, thanks for helping me hold on to this. I'll take it now if you don't mind. Gray's voice came from behind the young man. Before he could even react, Grays had bolted out of the place. Wait, what? The young man exclaimed. He was too shocked to react immediately. Only after Gray's figure disappeared into the hallway did he finally react. Without wasting any time, he rushed after him. How could he let Gray go with the orb like that? He had expended a lot of effort just to ward off the beast. Now Gray appeared again and took it so casually. He even had the guts to say thanks. I'll kill you. The young man's enraged voice could be heard across the hallway. Unfortunately, no matter how much he screamed, Gray was not going to stop and wait for him. If the space element was left out, Gray still had a large array of elements to help with his speed. If he added his physical speed as well, then it was basically impossible for anyone in the Overlord plane to catch up with him if he wanted to escape. On hearing the young man scream, Gray chuckled as he ran away. When he passed the item to the young man, he originally ran away, but after hearing the sounds of fighting, he came back. He was about to give up on it when the young man brought out the talisman. Only after seeing it did he start to plan on how to recollect the orb. Taking it from the hands of the young man would have been difficult, but it wasn't impossible. Who knew the young man would throw the orb into the air, presenting him with a heavenly opportunity. He didn't think twice before swiping the orb away. Chapter 701. Damn it, damn it, damn it. The young man cursed as he chased after Gray. Even though he couldn't see Gray's figure, he didn't want to give up. You ass-ole, I'll kill your entire family. CK. The young man yelled in frustration when he was unable to locate Gray anymore, punching the wall by the side. He couldn't accept the fact that someone in a lower stage took advantage of him. This was unacceptable. Gray was currently laughing in one of the rooms. He wasn't even close to the hallway the young man was in. He had not only left that part of the mansion, but he was on another wing entirely. This thing is not bad. I'll try to see if I can get something out of it. Thinking up to this point, he tried to destroy it, but it didn't budge even after attacking it multiple times. Damn, I can't hold onto it like this throughout. He felt a little disappointed about it. Just as he was about to give up, he felt a reaction in his body. It was coming from the orb inside him. Huh, what's this? He was a little scared. The orb in his body is usually dormant, so seeing it have a reaction towards this orb alarmed him. The orb inside his body started vibrating, and the one in his hand followed suit, shaking to the same rhythm as the orb inside him. As the orb started to vibrate, a strange aura spread out from it. The second Gray sensed the aura, it was as if his consciousness went out of his body, entering a place filled with nothing but miasma. What's this? He asked himself, shocked by the sudden development. He tried recalling his consciousness back to his body, but to his shock, he was unable to. After trying multiple times, he gave up on it and decided to explore the place. The place was dimly lit, and other than miasma, he couldn't see anything else. He couldn't even see from his knee down, since it was covered by the miasma. This thing isn't trying to kill me, right? He asked himself, a little afraid. One of the main reasons he hated the orb inside him was that he had zero control over it. This meant that it could react however it wanted without him being able to do anything. It rarely reacted to anything, and since he got it, this was the first time it was doing something like this. I'll need to find a way around this thing. I can't take any chances, he concluded. While exploring the place, he was oblivious to time. Outside the mansion, 2 more days had gone by, and the miasma had returned. Every person inside had left the place, and the miasma had already covered the mansion. What's Gray doing? Alice felt something was wrong. I don't know, but he's still inside, apparently. Klaus's expression was gloomy. This was not something any of them expected. Gray still being in the mansion even after the miasma returned. Kyle wore a glum expression. The consequences of staying in this miasma was terrifying. Even if Gray came out in a few hours' time, he would have already been infected by the miasma, and it would only be a matter of time before he died. Of all of them, only Void had a nonchalant expression. He had seen Gray healing Ellis's father who was plagued by these miasmas, so he knew Gray would be alright. His only concern was that it took Gray a while to do this, and he was drained after every session. He didn't know if Gray was immune to the miasma, but if he relied on a special power to heal Ellis' father, then he would be in trouble once he stays in here for too long. Void, how come you're so nonchalant? Reynolds noticed Void's behavior and asked. I still don't get the reason why you people take him for a normal person, when he's obviously not. Void's reply stunned the group. Klaus thought about it for some time before smacking his head lightly. Haha. I totally forgot about his weird abilities, but it's still difficult not to worry about him. I don't think he's encountered something like this before. Alice and Reynolds nodded their heads. They knew Gray was special, but this was a miasma they've not seen in the Azure continent, so they didn't think Gray would have a way around it. He has, well, not personally. Void recapped the event in Ellis's house to the group. The group's expression lightened up a little, with the exception of Kyle, who felt his head was about to explode. How is that even possible? If he healed him a few hours or days after the miasma infected him, then it would have been believable. But months after the infection, is that even possible? Kyle thought to himself. This was something even those powerful figures at the top wouldn't be able to do. Yet Gray, who was still in the origin plane at that time, was able to do it. Other than feeling tired, he was fine. This was something that could transfer to someone else if they come in contact with anyone infected. Yet he healed him. Kyle was finally blown away by Gray. He had known he was different from the time they first met, but now, he didn't even know what to think anymore. If people were unique, then Gray was unique even when placed amongst other unique people. He's still alive, so don't worry, Void said to the group. He could sense Gray's life force, so he knew he was perfectly fine. The group calmed down and started looking at their gains in this place. Void and Alice were the biggest beneficiaries, while Klaus and Reynolds were also part of those who earned a lot of items from robbing people, along with tons of enemies. They were still discussing when they saw the young man speaking with Camille. That animal used me. I'll kill him the next time I see him, the young man said in annoyance. Hey, why didn't you kill him when you saw him the last time? Camille mocked. Chapter 702. Klaus and the others overheard the conversations between Camille and the young man, and couldn't help but chuckle. Although Gray rarely did things like this, it didn't mean he didn't do them. In the group, only Klaus had a talisman that belonged to a sage plane expert, so he could be said to have the highest security among them. Gray couldn't defeat the beast chasing him, so he placed the load on the young man's head. After the young man dealt with the beast, he came back and collected the item he left with him. Kyle shook his head when he heard this story. He never thought that Gray would do something like this. From how annoyed the young man looked, he was sure that if the young man saw him now, he would try everything in his power to kill him. Unfortunately for everyone, Gray hadn't even made any movement in the mansion. He was still seated in a cross-legged position with the orb in his hand. Unknown to him, he was slowly absorbing the orb. He was still stuck in the strange space, and even after walking for who knows how long, he managed to locate a hill. With nothing left to do, he tried comprehending the elements, but he was unable to sense them. Even with his high cultivation stage, he still wasn't able to sense any element except for the space element. Gray managed to sense the space element after a few hours of trying, but he was still unable to leave the space his consciousness was stranded in. With nothing left to do, he tried comprehending the space element, since it was the only thing he could do. While he was stuck in the mansion, his body was being ravaged by the miasma as soon as it returned to the mansion. Normally, it wouldn't really affect him, but since the orb was working on the strange orb he got, it couldn't help him. After the mansion was covered by the miasma, those around it started retreating. Gray's friends weren't an exception. They couldn't take the risk of being touched by the miasma, since it was extremely dangerous. Gray, who was the only one who could help them, was currently stuck in a mansion filled with miasma. The group could only retreat along with the others. Most of the people around started to leave. Since the group was hidden, most of Klaus and Reynolds' enemies left without finding them. A few tried to locate them when they left the mansion, but after multiple days, they gave up, thinking the duo had left the surrounding area. 1 week later, "We should stay in the city not too far from here. Once he returns, then he'll search for us," Klaus suggested. Staying here would be boring and tiring. It was best if they went to the city where they could experience things. Even if they didn't experience something new, it wouldn't change much. Gray continued sitting cross-legged in the strange space, trying to see if there was a way he could connect to the space element. In the blink of an eye, 2 more weeks went by with Gray still stuck in the mansion. If not for Void reassuring the group that he was still alive, they would have thought maybe something bad had happened to him. They stayed in the city close to the mansion. Kyle felt leaving would make the group take him in a bad light, so he didn't leave. Since the group trusted Void's words, then he would wait as well. 2 more weeks went by before Gray's motionless figure opened his eyes. After staying in the mansion for a month without any protection against the miasma, his body dried, almost to the same level as a dead person. When he saw his appearance, he was shocked. Only after he realized that he was slowly healing did he calm down. "I can't leave this place like this," he thought as he entered the miasma. He waited for a few days to recover from being infected by the miasma. After almost a week, he returned back to his original state. If it were before, it would have taken him at least a month or so before he recovered, but for some reason, he was able to heal quickly. Miasma. Who would have thought that someone would be able to wield it without these places? Gray thought as he looked around him. The strange place his consciousness was stuck in was actually where he could understand miasma. With this, he didn't need to fear any miasma in the Azure or Aurora continent. Miasmas were extremely dangerous, and would only form in places filled with the darkness element. This was all on the premise that the darkness elementalist uses his power in the same place. This would increase the chances of a miasma forming, and also increase the strength of said miasma. In the instances of such cases, even people without the space or darkness element could escape from this place. Although it was a little difficult, it was not impossible. A few days later, Gray left the mansion and walked deeper into the miasma. He had managed to recover his strength, and didn't look to be in danger of exposure to the miasma any longer. So he tried to explore this place. Maybe he could obtain some rare treasures deep in this place. After walking for almost 4 hours, he left the compound without finding anything. He continued his search, and after 3 more hours, he was unable to get anything. This place wasn't like other places. Because of the excess darkness element in the air, It was impossible to sense time, and those affected by it couldn't sense that they had ventured this deep into the place. Gray was busy searching for the center of the place, while his friends were enjoying their time in the city close to this place. There were a few people who wanted to try and see if they could acquire the technique about miasmas, but they were unable to meet the requirements. Chapter 703. Don't tell me there's nothing here, Gray said as he walked through the somewhat empty place. He had been searching for almost a week now, but even after leaving the compound where the mansion was located, he was still unable to locate any item. When he woke up, he realized that the orb in his hand was nowhere to be seen. He guessed that he had absorbed the entire orb, but since he wasn't sure of what happened, he didn't think too much about it. Besides, he already benefited from it. Even though he was still in the miasma, he knew that presently, he could make a sort of miasma. It wasn't as strong as this one, but it was enough to incapacitate an origin plane elementalist. This was a start for him. He knew that as time went on, the strength of his miasma would improve. At that time, with a simple puff of smoke, he would be able to corrode the essence of those around him, making it difficult for them to use their elements. 2 days later, he got to the center of the place. The miasma here was so strong that even he had a problem with dealing with it. The longer he stayed in the place, the more his body became corroded. Staying an hour here was the same as spending an entire week in the mansion. The darkness essence here is well above that of other places. I should be able to improve my darkness elemental grade if I stay for a few days, he thought as he looked around. The appeal of increasing his elemental grade was high, but thinking of the risk, he decided against it. His body had already dried up, and if stayed here for a day longer, then his bones would be corroded as well, and his body would start to fall apart. Gray turned around. Since he had come to a decision, there was no use in staying here any longer. Leaving was the best choice. It took him almost 2 days before he managed to leave the area infected by the darkness element. When he left the place, his body was already all dried up, and only his bones were visible. If his friends saw him, they wouldn't believe it was him since he was completely different. When he saw his appearance, he knew that he had to at least try to recover some of his body before going in search of his friends. He could already sense that Void was not far away, so he found a safe cave before trying to heal up. The moment he came out of the miasma, Void, who was with Klaus, sensed it. He's out of that place, Void said. Is he coming? Klaus asked excitedly. No, he seems to be staying close to the miasma, Void replied after trying to sense Gray's location. All right, that's enough for us, Klaus replied. He went back to inform the group of what Void said, and they were visibly excited when they heard this. They went straight towards the place the moment they heard Gray was no longer there. With Void directing them, they managed to locate Gray in a matter of a few hours. When they saw Gray, Klaus's eyes nearly bulged out. This was the same reaction for the others. Although Gray wasn't fat or chubby, he couldn't be said to be thin as well. Presently, even after recovering, his bones were still visible. This showed just how much his body dried up when he was stuck in the miasma. Damn, this place really isn't a nice place, Klaus commented when he saw his condition. Well, I'm alive, that's good enough, right? Gray replied as he looked at his condition. He knew they were coming toward him, but even after using the light element, this was the best he could heal himself to. It would still take him at least a week or so before he completely recovers. You look like crap, Reynolds said. The skeleton of a dead person, Klaus added. You know how those corpses look like? They are better than your current appearance, Reynolds added. Oh, and when you're... Klaus was in the middle of saying something when Gray interrupted him. Enough, I already know I look shitty. No need to rub it in. I'll be fine in a few days at most, Gray said. Well, since I'm better looking now, why don't we go out and ask people who's better looking? Klaus asked with a grin. Bang! Klaus's figure was sent flying. It was unknown when Gray attacked, but everyone knew he was the one who did it. Klaus's figure shot out of the cave, crashing a few inches away from the miasma. When he saw the miasma so close to him, Klaus freaked out and hastily retreated even though he was crawling. He already saw how Gray looked. If he allowed this thing to touch him, then he was done. His handsome face he was so proud of would be gone for a while. Such a petty person. If I didn't land a few inches away from this thing, my pretty face would have been destroyed, Klaus thought as he looked at the cave Gray was located in. Of course, he didn't dare to say this in Gray's presence. He naturally knew that Gray purposely made him land a few inches away from the miasma, when he could easily send him into the miasma. If he were to annoy Gray, then he would land in the miasma the next time. Kyle looked at Gray, a little taken aback that he was still alive after being stuck in the miasma for so long. Even elementalists above the elemental sovereign plane can't stay alive after being infected for so long. Yet, all that happened to Gray was that his body dried up. This was insane. You're a strange person, Kyle commented. I'm just a normal person, Gray replied. He didn't really feel strange. That's unacceptable. I don't think even you believe that, Kyle replied. Chapter 704. Gray didn't continue his conversation with Kyle, since there was no use in doing so. He asked how long he had been stuck there. His facial expression changed slightly when he realized how long it was. I never thought it took so long. Well, my gains aren't that bad, he thought to himself as he stared inside his body. His body was slowly creating miasma. Unlike other things, he couldn't just create it, rather, it would slowly form. This means that it was expendable. Once he uses up his reserves, then he would have to wait for some time before his body made more miasma. It was quite a strange situation. What happened? Alice asked. She was a little curious as to why Gray stayed in the miasma, even risking his life because of it. She wasn't the only one who was curious. The others were as well, especially Kyle. He wanted to know what made Gray stay. A long story, and it was completely accidental. Gray dodged the question, but he also told them he had no plans of staying there for so long, and that it was an accident. Okay, the group nodded. They all knew that the only reason Gray wasn't going into details was because of Kyle. He still didn't trust him enough to speak out his secrets. It took him years before he told his friends about it, much less Kyle, who they've known for less than a few months. Kyle knew Gray didn't speak because of him, but he didn't try to pry any longer. All he knew was that whatever kept Gray in that place must have been special. Oh, that guy is searching for you. Klaus recalled something and said, "What guy?" A look of confusion appeared on Gray's face. "The one you tricked into fighting a beast." Klaus told him of the young man's intentions after he came out. Haha. He was stupid. Did he think I'll give him something I got that easily? Gray laughed when he heard how incensed the young man was when he left the mansion. The fact that he brought the issue out meant that he was infuriated. Gray didn't really care how the young man felt, as long as he didn't try to cause any trouble for him. Then he wouldn't be bothered with him. Can we get going now? Klaus asked. You really want to see how bad the miasma will affect you, don't you? Gray looked at him. His words were clearly a threat. Klaus gulped in fear before retreating out of the cave. Why don't you recover first? I'll keep guard outside. Alice and Reynolds burst into laughter when they saw this. Klaus loved his face too much to let something like this happen to him. He couldn't even fathom the possibility of it happening. Kyle watched the friends, and for a split second, he actually felt envious of their relationship. They bicker with each other, help each other, understand each other, and of course, fight against each other. They each had personalities that helped the others. For instance, Gray was kind of antisocial. Klaus, Alice, and Reynolds on the other hand were very friendly. The only issue with Klaus and Reynolds was that they were troublemakers. Alice has helped resolve most of the issues they caused while they were staying in the city, waiting for Gray to come out. The group stayed with Gray as he recovered. Have you been able to use it? Gray asked Void telepathically. Void got the item they came here for, so he wanted to know if Void had used it yet. No, I'm waiting for you. We'll have to use it simultaneously, or else if it's separated, it would lose more than half of its essence, which would make the effects decrease substantially, Void explained. Okay. We'll use it when I'm done healing. It should be able to improve your rank, right? Gray asked. Void had been at the peak of rank 5 for a while now, and it was around time he improved his rank. It wasn't as easy as it sounded, but Void shouldn't really have any problems with the help of this treasure. I'll break through once I absorb this thing. The only thing is that I'll not be able to help you for some time, Void replied. Oh, why's that? Gray asked. I'll be sleeping. Void's reply almost made Gray choke on his saliva. He finally remembered that most of the times that Void has advanced a rank, he was asleep. What sort of training method is that? Gray complained internally as his eyes twitched. He stopped speaking with Void about it, since it would only make him depressed. People trained hard just to advance a stage, while there are the likes of Void that slept and advanced their ranks. Things like this make people question the fairness of life. Yes, we know life's not fair, but can you stop favoring people so much? You're making it seem as if living is so easy when it's not. What did you get in that place? Void asked when Gray stopped speaking about the treasure. Just like the others, he also wanted to know what Gray got from the place. Miasma. Gray replied with an evil chuckle. Miasma. I don't understand. Void wore a confused look. My body can create and store miasma for some reason now. It's strange, but it's not a bad ability to have. I can easily corrode the surrounding elemental particles, making it difficult for others to use their elemental powers. Gray explained in glee. Gaining new abilities like these naturally made him excited. He hated how it happened, but it didn't mean that he'll not cherish his new strength. This could be used as a trump card, even against those more powerful than he is. As long as he's able to store a large amount, then he should be able to use it to at least scare off these people. The effect wouldn't be as powerful as these natural miasmas, but it should still be enough to cause them some worry. That's insane. Is it even possible? Void asked. Apparently, it is. I think it has something to do with the orb I obtained in the mansion. Gray said. He didn't add the fact that he also had another orb in his body, which reacted to it to make this strange ability possible. You're one mysterious person. I don't think people will believe this was possible. Void commented. He was genuinely surprised by Gray's new ability. It wasn't something that was supposed to be possible. Gray started his healing once he was done speaking with Void. The others were waiting for him to recover before they left. Their current target was the higher-leveled regions. They've already spent so much time and still haven't been able to get into any faction, since they didn't feel like they would be enough for them. Even if they weren't on the same level as those in those higher-leveled regions, they wouldn't have a problem with getting into a faction with their strength and talent. 2 days went by in the blink of an eye. Gray had almost completely recovered from his previous state. Although he wasn't back to his normal state, he wasn't far from it. Walking around wouldn't be embarrassing any longer, since there were tons of people thinner than he was. I liked how you previously looked, Klaus remarked as they stepped into the city. Gray threw a glance his way, and Klaus laughed mischievously. They were already out of where the miasma was located, so he didn't have any reasons to be afraid that Gray would send him into it. What are your plans? Gray turned his attention to Kyle. They only accidentally met when they went after the treasure, since they've already left the place, and were already planning to leave this region entirely. He felt it was right to ask Kyle what he wanted. If he still wanted to accompany them, he had no issues with it, but if he wanted to go his separate way, then it was best. I think I'll hang around with you guys for a while, if it's okay with you all. Kyle looked at the group. You're more than welcome. We rarely get to meet new people, and you seem to know a lot, Reynolds replied. Alice and Klaus nodded, and Kyle turned his attention back to Gray. He was the one left to agree to his request. I have no issues with you traveling with us. Gray nodded as well. Since they've already come to an agreement, it was time to leave. Alice didn't even challenge who she wanted anymore, since they had already spent so much time waiting for Gray. They headed straight for the teleportation array and prepared to leave this region. With an added figure to their group, the spirit stone expenses increased exponentially. On the way to the teleportation array, Gray felt something heating up in his storage ring. Chapter 705. Teacher's been requesting a meal for a while now. Gray chuckled when he sensed how hot the plaque was. It was evident that his teacher had been signaling him for a long time now, and since he couldn't really feel it, he was unaware. I'll make something once we get to the woods. They used the teleportation array and were transported to a small town close to the borders. Teleportation from one region to another was prohibited, so they'll naturally have to cross on foot. Gray asked Kyle what he knew about those secret realms. He remembered Sylvia speaking about it, but he still didn't have a clue about it. She told him some details, but not much, thinking he already knew. Secret realms. Well, as the name implies, they're a secret for a reason. But since I've been to one before, I know a thing or two about it. They are a link to another world. Kyle's reply stunned Gray and the group. Another world. Gray and his friends looked at Kyle curiously. Hearing the word another world piqued their interest. Yes, actually, only those who have been to it know about this. Most people think it's just a place that will transport you to a secret pocket dimension created by a powerful expert from old times. But the truth is, it actually takes you to another world completely where you encounter another race, Kyle explained. The only good thing is that these worlds seem to have restrictions, so it's impossible for the race there to grow past the sage plane. If they want to grow past that stage, then they will have to leave their world and come to ours. Unfortunately, that's unacceptable. The last time another race was allowed into a world, it caused a huge war after some years, Kyle added. Gray and the others exchanged glances. Void had a strange look when he recalled those small guys they fought back at the Azure continent. Those guys must have been the other race, he said to Gray. Most likely, Gray replied. Kyle told them what he knew. Of course, he didn't speak of everything, since he wasn't allowed to say everything he saw there. Most of what he was saying was general knowledge to powerful families or factions. He could already guess that Gray and his friends seemed to be either from a powerful family that was hidden away, or they were geniuses traveling to join a powerful faction. He still couldn't grasp how they weren't from a powerful family or faction. They were talented almost on the same stage as those from high-leveled factions. Gray in particular didn't seem to lose out against those in the same stage from high-leveled faction. If Reynolds were to fight against someone on the same stage as himself and brought out the elemental warrior, then he would almost certainly obtain the victory. They were still traveling in the woods when Gray finally caught a wild boar that he used to prepare a meal for his teacher, who had been requesting it for some time now. "How are things with your little companion?" he asked Alice as they started eating their part of the food. "She's good," Alice responded as the little cely came out from her body and glanced at the meal, with drool almost coming out from its little mouth. Alice cut a small piece for it, and it started eating happily. Even though Alice had to rely on Gray's cooking to get it, it couldn't really be said to be the only reason it agreed to follow them. So it wasn't really too bothered after not getting a piece of meat from Gray's personal cooked meal. Apparently, it enjoyed every meal. While they were waiting for Gray, she bought food from multiple inns, and the cely ate them with the same glee as when eating Gray's meals. "That's nice to know." Gray nodded his head before sharply turning his head in another direction. He could sense a strange aura coming from that direction. "We should get going," he said to the group and stood up immediately. "What's the problem?" the others asked. They knew that since Gray moved this quickly meant that whatever he sensed wasn't good for them. Necromancers. Gray's eyes were focused on where he was sensing the necromancer from. He didn't know the strength of the person, but he knew it was a necromancer. What he found appalling was that this necromancer seemed to have been able to sense him from over a 1 kilometer radius. When he tried to check himself, his expression changed drastically. It was only now that he realized that compared to before, the mark on his body had grown stronger. This meant that instead of the small range that it previously had, its distance had increased. Could it be that what she did has worn out? Or is this the work of someone else? He racked his brain as he tried to come up with an answer. While thinking up to this point, he recalled those small black creatures. They were the only powerful necromancers he had encountered since being marked. This meant that they were the most likely culprit. Damn it. Why must they choose to worry me? He complained internally as he increased his speed. Are you sure? Those people are very secretive and rarely come out to chase anyone. Kyle tried to get confirmation from Gray. He knew all about necromancers, and from how they were hunted down, they would prefer hiding in a cave to actively searching for someone. 100%, Gray replied. He didn't tell him why he was able to sense them, or why he started to run the second he did, and honestly, he didn't need to tell him. All right. The best thing to do now is to head for the nearest city. They wouldn't dare to go within the territories of these powerful cities, Kyle advised. With the group's strength, their speed shot up when they focused fully on running. The journey, which was originally supposed to take them at least 2 hours, took them lesser than 30 minutes. Chapter 706. The visage of a large building soon came into view. When the group saw this place, they calmed down, since it meant that they wouldn't need to worry about the necromancers any longer. We're saved. Reynolds laughed in joy. For now, Kyle looked at Gray suspiciously. The only reason Gray would know about necromancers and be cautious of them is probably because he had encountered them before. The only way necromancers would be able to track him is if he were marked. This was common knowledge to most of the large families and factions in the Aurora continent. Gray's gaze clashed with Kyle and gave him an understanding nod. He knew Kyle understood what was happening. The only reason he didn't want to tell his friends about it is because no good news has come out from anyone marked by necromancers from the past. If they research, they would be able to know what he would experience. Kyle looked at Gray with a complicated look. He knew all that usually happens to geniuses marked by necromancers. Once the news of Gray being marked spreads across the necromancers organization, then he would be in danger. But he felt things might be a little different with Gray. After all, he couldn't classify Gray with other geniuses. There's a chance that Gray might be able to survive this ordeal. If he does, then he would be the first person who has been able to survive this. Even the genius who was protected by the strongest faction in the Middle Continent was killed after a few years of being marked. Necromancers were powerful figures in the Aurora continent even though they're hiding. It doesn't mean that they were weak. The group entered the city and walked straight for the teleportation array. The first thing they needed to do was to find if there were any competitions that they could participate in. This was their only way of easily joining a faction. Either this, or maybe if any of them were recruiting. On the way to the teleportation array, they asked if there were any competitions going on in the region, but they didn't get any good information. After a few turns, they got to the teleportation array. Using it, they moved to the city closest to this city. 3 days went by, and they had moved the entire region, and were already at the end of this region preparing to move to the next region. They heard that there was a competition taking place in the next region, so they wanted to meet up before the competition started. It would take them a few days or so before they got there, and the competition would start in a week's time. On the way, they encountered an obstacle. It was none other than a necromancer, who was in the early stages of the Sage Plane. To think that you would escape this far. You made me chase after you for so long. The necromancer laughed as he stared at Gray and his group. Why are you following us? Alice asked. You don't need to know. You'll be a good specimen for my new experiment. The necromancer laughed evilly. Unlike most of the necromancers the group had met, this was actually Chubby. Are you sure you're a real necromancer? Klaus asked when he saw his figure. Although he hadn't really seen other necromancers, he heard from Gray and Kyle that most of them were very thin. What are you saying? The man asked angrily. Not to be rude, but I heard necromancers are usually, life deprived. Klaus explained with a shrug. I'll kill you. The necromancer said angrily. You can't. Klaus laughed. The reason he was still this courageous was none other than the talismans Chris gave to him. This was why he wasn't scared of speaking to the necromancer. If things got too hard, he would use them. Why are you so confident? Do you think you can survive? The necromancer asked. Yes, I do, Klaus replied before taking out a talisman. When the necromancer sensed the power in the talisman, he froze and thought about his choices. If he were to engage with them, he wasn't certain of being able to instantly kill them, which meant that they would have the opportunity to use these talismans, which would place his life in danger. All I want is him. You all don't need to endanger yourselves. The necromancer decided to bargain with them. He's with us. There's no way we can leave him for you. Klaus stood in front of Gray. One talisman will not be able to kill me. What would you do after using it? The necromancer asked. Use more. Klaus brought out another talisman. He gave one to Gray, Reynolds, Alice, and even Kyle. The necromancer almost tripped when he saw this. These things were very difficult to make. Why did Klaus have so many? They must be from one of those large families. This is why I hate these geniuses. The necromancer thought while looking at the group hatefully. Are you sure you want to do this? The necromancer asked Klaus. Of course. Do I look like I'm joking? I can give you one if you want. Klaus played with one of them, pretending as if he wanted to throw it in the necromancer's direction. The necromancer was scared and retreated a few steps. Haha, to think you're afraid. Klaus laughed and held onto the talisman. Let's go, Klaus said to the others and started walking forward. To the dismay of the necromancer, Gray and his friends walked past him without being able to do anything. He was even embarrassed by Klaus in the process. No matter how you run, we'll find you, the necromancer said to Gray as he walked past him. I'm not afraid of your kind, Gray said coldly. It was only a matter of time before he would be able to move freely in the Aurora continent. Chapter 707. What's going on? Klaus asked after they left the woods. There was no way this person would chase them for no reason, especially given the distance they moved. Also, his statement to Gray when they were leaving meant that there was something between them. Gray sighed wryly. He knew he wouldn't be able to hide it any longer. I'm marked. Marked? Alice asked with a curious expression. Yes, a necromancer used his life force to place a mark on me. Now I'm being hunted down by all necromancers. Gray shook his head wryly. All necromancers? Klaus asked. Yes, they can sense the mark in my body if they're close to me. Initially, when I was marked, there was an expert with me, and she managed to reduce the effect to only a 1-kilometer radius. But after encountering those creatures back home, they seemed to have increased the distance. Gray explained, a wry smile on his face. He hated his current situation. When it was a 1-kilometer radius, he could still cope with it, but now, things have become incredibly difficult. If he were to go on an adventure on his own and he encountered these people, he might lose his life if they were stronger than he is. That's messed up. Isn't there a way to remove the mark? Klaus asked. No, not even the most powerful expert in the continent can help him remove it. Kyle told them the story of the genius from the #1 faction in the Middle Continent. The group's expression changed when they heard about this. They didn't think it was this bad. No need to worry, necromancers are very rare. Since they're only darkness elementalists, their population is low, Gray said, and besides, they don't enter cities like this one. Even if they do, they wouldn't be able to show that they're necromancers, since it will make everyone hunt them down. The others knew that Gray was only trying to reassure them, but they still found it difficult to accept things as they are. If even the most powerful faction couldn't protect their genius, then who could protect Gray? Come on, the competition will be starting soon. There'll be suitable factions for us, Gray said to the others, trying to rouse their spirits. Sure, let's get going. Alice nodded. She believed Gray would be able to survive this. Just like Carl thought, she knew Gray was different when compared to other people. Maybe he would be able to create a miracle once again. The others nodded and followed Gray as he led the way. Wait, you guys are trying to join a faction? Kyle asked as they walked forward. Yes, Reynolds replied. Wait, you're saying you guys weren't in a faction or any of the large families? Kyle was dumbfounded. How could geniuses like these not be part of any powerful faction or family? It was unbelievable. Nope. Klaus shook his head. Kyle was lost for words. He wanted to speak, but he paused. This was a shocking discovery. He never thought this was even possible. When he was traveling with the group, he originally thought they were from large families, and their families had ties with each other, hence the close friendship between the four. Where are you from? He couldn't help but ask. Somewhere far away. Even if we tell you, you still wouldn't know it. Gray was the one who answered him this time. Kyle still didn't know how to take this news. Do any of you wish to join my faction? He suddenly asked. He was a fire elementalist, so his faction focused more on the fire element, but they wouldn't mind taking in geniuses of this caliber, even if they were of other elements. And besides, Gray and Alice had the fire element. We plan to join different factions, Reynolds replied. Why? Kyle asked. To him, it didn't make sense. Why would they actively separate? With their chemistry, if they stayed in the same faction, they would be the most feared group. This would give us more of a challenge, since we'd like to see how far we've grown after separating for months or even years. We all know Gray's stronger, and being with him isn't good for us. Klaus replied. It still doesn't make sense, Kyle said. Haha. Don't worry about it. You can join in our little competition as well. The person with the highest cultivation stage and the most powerful person will be the leader of the group, Klaus said. Do you think you can actually lead us? Reynolds asked with a mocking smile. Amongst the group, Klaus was the one who advanced the quickest thanks to his insane luck, so they knew he would definitely be the one with the highest cultivation stage. Gray was the strongest. Even if they were 2 or 3 stages ahead of him, it would still be almost impossible to defeat him. What are you saying? I've been doing a great job all this while, haven't I? Klaus turned to Void. I support you, Void said. The group continued bickering as they entered the city. In the end, they decided that no matter what happened, Klaus wouldn't lead the group. What Kyle found strange was that since he was following the group, they didn't seem to have a leader. Whatever decisions they wanted to make, they needed the permission of the others before deciding on it. He sighed with a shake of his head. Looks like we managed to make it, Gray said as they entered the city. The city was bustling with activity due to the competition that would be taking place. They got here 2 days before the competition, so they still had time to explore the city before the competition began. They would take their time to access all the factions that will be present in the competition, before picking the one to join. Kyle told them all the information he knew about the factions. Alice and Reynolds picked 2 different factions that focused on the lightning element, while Klaus picked a faction that was based on the water element. Which faction are you joining? Klaus asked Gray. The competition would be starting that day, and the others had already picked a faction they wanted to join. None, Gray replied. Huh, everyone exclaimed in shock. There's no one I'm interested in. Well, to be precise, I would like to move to another region, Gray replied. Although joining a faction was good, he didn't feel this was the region for him, so he planned to check out other regions first. Okay, but wouldn't traveling alone put you in danger? Klaus asked. After hearing about the necromancers hunting him down, the group felt he would be in danger if he moved alone. If not for the talisman Klaus had, then things would have been dangerous for him during his last encounter. I've begged teacher for some talismans. Besides, Void would be breaking through soon, Gray said. After the last incident, he asked his teacher for a talisman. The plaque his teacher made was extremely useful. Instead of sending a meal over, he wrote a letter and sent it over. He knew his teacher would throw a tantrum after seeing it, but since the talisman was important to him, he had to. Chris didn't agree to make a talisman for him, since he still hadn't recovered from the last ones he made for Klaus. But after being blackmailed and begged by Gray, he decided to take the risk. The reason he agreed was that he couldn't afford to stop eating his delicious meals, nor could he let his cook die. Uncle, he agreed. Klaus asked, surprised. Of course. I'm his student after all. Gray shrugged, not telling them of how he had to blackmail him. When Kyle heard their conversation, he finally knew the relationship between Klaus and Gray. This explained why the duo were so close and understood each other so well. But he still didn't know the relationship of Alice and Reynolds to the group. We should get going. The competition will start soon, and you 4 need to register, he said to them. What about you? Reynolds asked. I have no interest in joining the competition. I'm part of a faction, and the rewards aren't important to me, Kyle said. I'm also not joining, but I only want to test out my strength, Gray said, trying to convince Kyle to join. Actually, I have a few enemies here. Going on stage will only show them that I'm around, Kyle said. Oh, why didn't you say that earlier? Reynolds patted him on the shoulder. The others didn't pressure him any longer and headed to the arena. Almost everyone in the city was heading towards the arena, so it was pretty busy. When they got there, they were amongst the first few who made it there. Without delay, they headed towards where they would register for the competition. Chapter 708. On the way to the arena, Carl used a piece of cloth to cover from his nose down, leaving only his eyes visible. This would keep the people he had a feud with from recognizing him. He knew Gray and his friends were bound to attract the attention of most of the people here, and since he was sitting with them, they would notice him as well. As long as he didn't fight, he would be safe. Very few people had green flames, and his enemies would definitely try to see if he was the one, even if he covered his face. Void, how long will you be asleep once you use that item? Gray asked Void telepathically as they registered for the competition. At least 2 weeks, then at most a month, Void replied. Gray thought about the issue for a while, before deciding that once his friends joined a faction, he would stay in a city and absorb the treasure with Void. He had gained some things during their travels, so there's a chance that he might advance to the 8th stage of the Overlord plane after using this treasure. His advancement has been quite fast since coming to the Aurora continent. This was all thanks to the things he had acquired. Of the group, the next person who would see a breakthrough soon was Reynolds. He was already in the 4th stage of the Overlord plane for a while now. Once Void breaks through to the Sage plane, things will be safer. Of course, he still had to worry about being chased by elemental venerables. But the good news was that elemental venerables and above rarely travel. They mostly stay in closed-door cultivation, trying to advance their stage. When an elementalist grows to this stage, most of them don't like moving frequently. Necromancers, for one, are people who did tons of research, so they would mostly be hiding somewhere. His only prayer was not to accidentally pass through this sort of area, because no matter what a necromancer was doing, unless they would die if they left it, they would definitely try to seek out who was marked. The group completed their registration and went over to get their seats. Since they came early, they picked a seat in the front row. They spoke as they waited for the start of the competition. As time went on, people started flooding the arena. A few minutes before the start of the competition, a commotion broke out which drew the group's attention. A large shadow covered the sky. Looking up, it was that of a gigantic bird that was flying in the sky. It flew to the platform and landed there. As soon as this bird came into sight, 5 more came. They were filled with people, both old and young. In one of them in particular, it was filled with only girls, and they were all in blue clothing, with the insignia of ice on their back. That's the faction I'm joining. Klaus pointed at the group with girls. You do know that's an all-girls faction, right? Kyle asked with a weird expression. All the more reason I want to join. I'm a handsome guy who would perfectly fit in there, Klaus said with a proud expression. Do they take lightning elementalists as well? Reynolds asked. No, and besides, you're too ugly, Klaus said. What do you mean too ugly? Reynolds snapped at Klaus. Look at me, then take a look at you. I don't even want to talk about Gray, since that will send you straight to depression, Klaus said mockingly. Don't drag me into this, Gray said from the side. But you have to admit, you have a beautiful face, Klaus said, pointing at Gray's face. You're crazy, Gray said. Kyle watched the group with a smile on his face. He still found the group amusing even after staying with them for so long. He never thought that they would bicker this much. I don't think they will allow you to join them though, Kyle stated. You don't need to bother about that, I'll figure out a way myself. Getting their attention is easy, Klaus said confidently. Kyle didn't pursue the matter any longer. He knew they weren't from this side, so if Klaus refused to accept what he told him, it was up to him. Maybe after he was rejected, he would learn to listen. Besides, I have a plan B, Klaus added. While the group were discussing, the members of the factions that came all went to their seats. After a few more minutes, an elder from one of the factions stepped forward. He stood on the platform in the middle and started addressing the crowd. The elder spoke about the rules and the potential of joining one of them if they could get a good position in the competition. Just like the Geniuses rankings, the battles are shared in the early, mid and late stages of each plane, but the battles start from the origin plane. Most of the people in the origin plane are around 14 to 17 years old. Back in the Azure continent, around that age, elementalists were still in the arcane plane. This showed the difference between both places. The number of people who registered for the competition were enormous, so it would take some time before it even got to the Overlord plane. Should we watch or leave? Gray asked. Of course we're staying. How will I build a connection in getting into that faction if I leave? Klaus asked. You. Kyle shook his head and gave up. He never thought Klaus's plan was to befriend the girls from the faction. I'm a friendly person. You don't need to worry about me not being able to befriend them, Klaus said. Alice looked at him with disgust. If not for the fact that they were in a public place, she would have beat him up. Make sure you take me along. I'm also very friendly, Reynolds said. You're too ugly. Even after walking with us for so long, you've not been able to improve. Klaus smirked, irritating Reynolds. You should stop talking, the competition is about to start, Gray said to Klaus, giving him a threatening look. Klaus glared at Gray and moved closer to Reynolds as they continued their conversation. Alice looked at the duo acting like kids. Well, to be fair, they were all still very young, but Klaus and Reynolds seemed to take it to another level. There are times when they do things without even thinking about the repercussions. Just take the time they robbed those people at the mansion for instance. Although it was fun and all, they created a whole legion of enemies for themselves. These people wouldn't even mind coming together just to take them down. Klaus and Reynolds could not be bothered with this. All they thought about was having fun. Not just that, but they acquired a lot of essence stones from their robbery. The stones have been useful since they used the teleportation device a lot during their travels. The stones Gray had were almost used up due to the travels. Before long, the competition started. Seeing people who were around 15 years being in the origin plane amazed Klaus, Reynolds, and Alice. They never thought that they would see people this young being in the origin plane. Given the numbers of the people who registered, around 50 people were placed in one platform. They would brawl, and the 10 people who were left would advance to the next round. Once they advanced to the next round, they would then draw lots for the other rounds. The top 200 people had a chance of joining one of the factions. They also have the chance of challenging a member of any of the faction in the same stage as them. If they could defeat the person, then they could join said faction. But if they cannot defeat said genius, then they couldn't join that faction unless the faction willingly picks them. Alice and Reynolds were excited by the news, since they would be able to pick the particular faction they wanted because of this rule. All they had to do was defeat the person in the same stage as them. They decided to keep all their trump cards until that battle. Once they got to the top 200, then they would challenge them immediately. Klaus looked at the faction that had only ladies, his eyes brimming with confidence. He was certain that he would join this faction. With his talent, it would be difficult for them to refuse him. Maybe he would become the first male to join this all-female faction. Even if he didn't join them, he wanted to create a good relationship with them. Gray didn't have any faction in mind. All he wanted to do was to test out his strength. And this was the best opportunity for him to do so. Chapter 709. The competition progressed in an organized manner. With these powerful factions hosting the competition, these people taking part wouldn't dare to act unrestrained. It took almost 3 days before the top 200 for the origin plane was picked. The numbers that registered were just too many, so they had to divide the number of battles taking place. According to what was said, those in the overlord plane that registered were actually higher than those who registered on the origin plane. When the top 200 were picked, it was time to either continue the competition and see if they could get a good ranking in their respective stages. Other than challenging members of a faction, there is another way in getting into a faction of your choice, getting to the top 10. Any elementalist who manages to enter the top 10 can pick whichever faction they desire. Only 10 people challenged a member of a faction immediately, and all 10 were defeated within 2 minutes at most. Some were taken out with a single blow. Seeing this sent chills down the spines of the others. He had the thought of challenging them. They all decided it was best to wait and try to see if they could sneak into the top 10. Aren't they a little too powerful? Klaus couldn't help but comment. He didn't feel too confident in defeating anyone from the faction any longer. The strength showed by those in the origin plane was already beyond his expectations, and he rated them very highly to begin with. If even that isn't enough, then getting his wish was going to be more difficult than he thought. These aren't even the cream of the crops. They're just those close to them, Kyle said. Klaus, Alice, and Reynolds were shocked by his words. If these people weren't the strongest, then how powerful would those at the top be? Well, I can't wait to find out how powerful they are when I join their faction, Klaus said, looking at the same faction fervently. The main reason Klaus picked this particular faction wasn't mainly because it was an all-girls faction, but because they had the best ice techniques, according to what he found out. And what Kyle told him, they were also said to be the best water faction in this region. If he wanted to join a faction, then it had to be the best. At least then he would know that he could grow quickly. Being an all-girls faction was just a bonus for him. He naturally didn't have any lewd intentions towards them. Getting entangled with any of them will only sully his name. But he still enjoyed seeing beauties. Who wouldn't want to see beauties? By any chance, do you know what the secret realm they go to is like? Klaus pointed at the all-girls faction. Other people rarely know what the secret realm of another faction looks like. Although, there are times that some factions or families will actively invite people over to explore one of their secret realms. Most big factions and families have more than one secret realm. These are like the backbone of a faction, since it's what makes their geniuses grow stronger faster. Kyle explained. So that's a no? Klaus asked. Kyle shook his head with a soft smile. He knew Klaus understood the meaning of his words, but he still wanted to confirm if he knew what it looked like. You'll find out once you join one, no need to be too bothered, Gray stated. This was obvious, but Klaus had his full attention on this particular faction. They even had a catchy name, Moonlight. It was as if they weren't a faction, but a nation. Who wouldn't want to join a faction with a catchy name? While the group were discussing, the top 200 had started their battles. Those who challenged the members from a faction and lost still had the chance to redeem themselves. If they could get to the top 10, of course, they could still catch the eyes of those powerful figures in the factions as well. So they had to put up their best. A few representatives from smaller factions were still around. They could snap up all those who were rejected by the top factions. It was shocking that an Origin Plane elementalist who was still around 15 years or so would be rejected. In the Azure continent, such figures would be lauded by all. But here, some would become rejects, joining a lesser faction. Gray didn't watch the battles with much interest. He was more interested in absorbing that treasure. Thinking about it, they would spend some time here. If those in the Origin Plane took 3 days just to get to the battle of the top 200, then it would take longer for those in the Overlord Plane, since they had a higher number. Void, why don't you absorb it when we get back to the inn? He asked Void telepathically. Oh, in this city? Void asked. Yes, or is there a problem with that? Gray asked. It's quite special, so there's a huge chance that its aura would leak out. If that happens, then we would only be inviting trouble. Void explained. What about if I used a concealing array? Gray asked. I'm talking about after you use it. If you don't use it, then the second we take it out, the entire city will know, even those in the Origin Plane will sense it. But with the array, only people above the Overlord Plane will stand a chance of sensing it. Void elucidated. You mean? Gray was shocked. This is something that people sense even when hidden in a special place under that mansion covered in miasma. Do you think your small concealing array could help? Void asked with a raise of his brow. Although this sounded somewhat hurtful to Gray's pride as an array specialist, he couldn't deny the fact that what Void said was the truth. Before the aura of the treasure managed to sip out even in such a place, how could he conceal it? Chapter 710. How come it's safe in your spatial storage? Gray asked when he thought of the fact that the item was kept in Void's spatial storage all this while, and it hasn't been sensed by others. Simple. I cut off every access it has to elemental essence. Without it, it's basically ordinary. Once it comes out, the amount of essence it would absorb would alarm the entire city, and they would be able to easily track it here. Void explained. Oh, that's why. So what do we do about it now? Gray asked. We'll have to leave the city, at least a 5 kilometers distance away. That wouldn't even guarantee our safety. Then, there's also the possibility of an expert above the Sage Plane going past that place, putting us in even greater danger, Void said. Gray felt a headache coming when he thought of this. If what Void said is true, which it most likely is, then he couldn't afford to absorb the treasure now, which meant Void would have to seek other methods to break through. I guess we'll have to wait till we join a faction, and even that wouldn't guarantee our safety. All I need to do is try to get into one of those secret realms. No one below the Sage Plane can defeat me, so I wouldn't have anything to fear there. Gray came to a decision in a short time. He was already under the danger of being found by the necromancers after his head. If he were to take out such a treasure, then it would make others search for him as well. This is like a ticking time bomb, Gray thought to himself. It took 2 more days before the competition for those in the Origin Plane ended. Now, it was time for those in the Overlord Plane to begin. The next day, Gray and his friends looked at each other confidently. They all registered at the same time, so according to their calculations, they would be able to enter the same platform. If they were grouped among 50 people, they wouldn't have any problems with qualifying for the next round. Only when the competition was about to start did they realize a piece of vital information. 2 of them were in the mid stages, Alice and Reynolds, while the other 2 were in the late stages. Since it was done stage by stage, those in the early stages of the Overlord Plane were the ones who started the brawl. Damn, and it thought we would have been able to run rampant here, Klaus said with a disappointed look. I honestly forgot about this as well, Gray said. It took almost 2 days before those in the early stages of the Overlord Plane completed their brawl. They also continued to the next round, which was drawing lots. 2 more days went by, and those in the early stages finally completed their part of the competition. Surprisingly, 2 people managed to defeat members of the factions they wished to join, and didn't participate any longer in that competition. Those who managed to enter the top 10 picked the factions they wished to join. It was time for those in the mid-stages of the Overlord plane. Alice and Reynolds stepped forward. Since they registered at the same time, they were placed in the same platform. This didn't come as a surprise to the group. You two shouldn't embarrass me, remember I have people to impress. When they consider if I'm qualified, they would also look at the people I came with. It would be a shame if none of you manages to get into any faction. Klaus encouraged the duo. Well, it couldn't really be called encouragement. It was more like him pleading with them to perform exceptionally well, so the faction he wanted to join would know he was friends with geniuses as well. Heh, Reynolds smirked as they walked towards the platform. Alice couldn't even be bothered with Klaus and his words. All her attention was placed on a particular faction, Astrop. This was one of the best lightning factions in this region. Reynolds wouldn't be joining the same faction as her, opting to join another one. They made sure to look at the relationship between both, and only after confirming that both factions weren't enemies did they decide. On the platform they were placed, there were multiple youths in the 6th stage of the Overlord plane. Reynolds was still in the 4th stage of the Overlord plane, while Alice was in the 5th stage. But Reynolds could be said to be the most powerful person if he brought out his elemental warrior. He didn't plan on bringing it out now though. His aim was to get into the top 200 and challenge someone from the faction he wanted to join. Once he defeats his opponent, he wouldn't take any part in the competition any longer. This wasn't Alice's plan however. Unlike Reynolds, she loved fighting, so after challenging a member of the Astrop faction, she would still take part in the competition. When everyone was on the platform, the competition began. With 50 people placed on one platform, they were a lot. The battles were disorganized, since the people were too much, and only a few of them grouped up. Alice and Reynolds stayed together, fighting off any person who came close to them. They eliminated any of the people who tried to attack them, while also making sure they were on their guard. As time went on, the number of people on the platform started to dwindle, and before long, there were only 10 people left on their platform. With 10 people left, the place was spacious, and they could take their time fighting. The remaining participants looked at each other, all wary of their strength. Reynolds was the only one in the 4th stage of the Overlord plane that was left on this platform. This naturally brought a lot of attention to him. A few of the people here with a higher stage couldn't afford to see someone in a lower stage advance when they couldn't. This is the end of this video. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed and wish you wonderful rest of the day. The Silent Ruptors out.